Yeah.
Celestina, yeah, she's here. Great. So after Celestina's talk, then there will be a long break, and that will be a breakout session, and Margie will help with that. And there's also is a buffering time just in case if we run a few minutes late. Yeah. So did I post the Slack channel? Maybe I should do that.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah. So Margie, please let me know when can we start. I think the officially starts in 1:15, right?
Oh, I thought it was now.
Take a look.
Sorry, I have too many windows open. I'm trying to get the congregate people back.
Oh, okay. Let's wait for a few minutes.
I also thought
that
it was at 1:15.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. That's good.
Just like a 5-minute transition.
Yeah, the program says 1:15.
Great.
And 1:20 when my talk starts streaming.
Is the Slack channel another app?
Yes. So Slack is like an asynchronous discussion group. So if we log out of Zoom or Congregate, then all our information's discussion on chat will disappear, right?
Yes.
But however, if we continue discussion on Slack, it will be saved. So if you log out and log back again, you'll see your discussion still exists. It's for asynchronous discussion. So we use.
Huh? We had a great discussion on the tables. I had to get my wife's computer because I don't have Chrome.
Yeah, I got jumbled up. I had to get on through Google, and it just towards the end didn't work so well. So I don't know.
It's this Chrome thing. I don't have Chrome, but anyway. But Jules did a great job. We had a good conversation there.
Oh, great! I'm glad that Jules did great. No, Jules is also our CTPP student.
I know that. He's fantastic. I really like him.
Yes, he is great. He's actually working on awesome force fields now with Peter.
Hello, Jose.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good to see you again.
Great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, that's Margaret's show. I'm here just to listen to you.
Oh, you flatter me.
Margie and Margaret have done all the work.
Yeah.
Jose, you're our instructor, our mentor.
Yeah, but I haven't done the work, so I have to give credit to the people that did it.
Okay, I think 1 more minute left. Let me start welcoming everybody. Welcome back to the exciting virtual meeting. Our next session is Building Alliances with High School Physics Teachers. And before I turn the mic to our moderator, I wanted to inform everyone that there is a Slack channel. If you click on that Slack, then you can continue all these discussions asynchronously. It's because if you put everything type on chat on Zoom, once we log out, it will disappear. And we do not record Congregate as well. So if you wanted to continue this discussion with the host, please go on to Slack. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next moderator, PoLS students. And let me see, are you there?
Yep.
Okay, Count Bob is from Maryland. Here you are, all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Chung. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kaustubh Bag, and I'm talking to you from Maryland, where I'm a graduate student in physics. I'd like to welcome you all to this workshop on growing equity, inclusion, and diversity within the Physics of Living Systems Student Research Network. As we are all aware, diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM in general, and physics in particular, have come under immense scrutiny over the summer. And now we do have some data to inform our actions, especially at the undergraduate level, thanks to the American Institute of Physics and the American Physical Society. At the same time, as Dr. Blagoev touched upon in the morning, if we do not succeed at fostering an inclusive, supportive, and welcoming atmosphere at the high school level, especially in the public school system here in the US, we will not succeed in enriching the physics community. And this is, of course, a multifaceted problem involving not only teachers, but also requires support from family and the higher education system. But today, through this forum, we will discuss ways that we, as the PoLS community, can build alliances with high school teachers. We have a great set of speakers who will talk about topics ranging from new initiatives within the physics community, reaching out to high school physics departments, to making physics more equitable through teacher training, and finally ending with a physics teacher's own experiences teaching at a Title I school. As Dr. Chung mentioned this morning, all of the talks are pre-recorded, so we will play them, but the speakers are available for a live Q&A session after that. To maintain some structure, after we play the talks, I request all of you to type your questions into the chat, and I will read them out in order. Otherwise, I kindly request everyone except the speaker to please mute their microphone to avoid any feedback. With that, we are ready to hear from our first speaker, Dr. Eric Mazur. Dr. Mazur obtained his physics PhD from Leiden University and then came to Harvard in 1982 as a postdoc, where by his own admission, he intended to stay for only 1 year. But then 38 years later, he's still here, now as the Balkanski Professor of Physics and Applied Physics, where his lab works on the cutting edge of nanophotonics. Additionally, he's also a member of the Faculty of Education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And Dr. Mazur has done pioneering work in science education, focusing on interactive and peer-to-peer approaches to instruction for almost 30 years, for which he's won several accolades. Let's now hear from Dr. Mazur.
Thank the organizers of the Grow PoLS conference for giving me the opportunity to tell you a little bit about an effort I've recently started at Harvard University. I'm a longtime member of the PoLS network. In fact, I was the PI for many years of the Harvard PoLS effort. Now, before I tell you something about my new initiative, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my own background. I came to Harvard in 1982, so almost 40 years ago, as a postdoc, with the idea in my mind to go back to Europe, where I was from, and take on a job in industry. It was never my intention to become an educator. Long story short, after a year and a half as a postdoc, I ended up being promoted to a junior faculty position at Harvard University, which meant that I had to teach. And looking back at that first day of teaching in the early 80s, it strikes me now that I really never asked myself the question, how am I going to teach? What do people who come, non-majors in particular, who come into a physics course at Harvard know about physics? I simply did what my professors had done to me. I lectured. I think we all tend to do that. This is actually a picture of me lecturing many years ago. As you can see, this picture was taken BC, before computers. I'm using an overhead projector. Now, the reason that I started lecturing, as you see illustrated here in this picture, is because I naively assumed that I had learned physics sitting in a classroom like this, listening to my professors lecturing. I think we all tend to do that. We tend to project our own experiences on the world around us. And I'm sure that my professor my professors, when they started teaching in their career, they made exactly the same assumption. They mimicked what their professors had done to them. And so back generation after generation after generation, all the way to this person. This actually is Henry VIII, King of Germany, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, giving a guest lecture at the University of Bologna somewhere in the 11th century. It's an illustration from an illuminated manuscript of the 14th century representing that scene. And the resemblance with the picture I showed you a moment ago of my own class is just striking. True, we don't wear those clothes anymore, although we do wear them at commencement to remind ourselves that we're steeped in medieval traditions. But the arrangement and even some of the details, as you can see in the front row, the people are paying close attention. The second row here, they're a little bit less engaged, and in the back corner there, they're talking to each other. And then there's this guy, I don't know if he's fast asleep or cringing in agony. Overall, this scene could be any time in the past 1,000 years, except probably, as I said a moment ago, for the closing. Now, it took me a long time to realize that I was not on the right path, that essentially this lecturing created an illusion of being a good teacher, a big illusion. See, I was asked to teach a course that none of my colleagues wanted to teach, physics for pre-medical students. These were not students who wanted to learn physics. They were interested in biology, they were interested in the life sciences. But in order to get into medical school, they had to take physics. And most of them already hated physics before setting foot in my classroom. Now, I didn't know that. And I didn't know that pre-meds were not very kind to physicists when I was given that task. And therefore, most of my colleagues would get rather poor end of semester evaluations and not like teaching this course. Anyway, so I started teaching, I started lecturing, and something really interesting happened. By the traditional standards, I was actually doing a good job. The reason the students liked my lectures, they gave me high end of semester evaluations, 4.5, 4.8 on a 5-point scale. So clearly they liked what I was doing in the classroom. On top of that, they could solve pretty complicated problems. Coming from Europe, the distinction between algebra-based and calculus-based physics didn't make any sense to me. So even though I was supposed to teach an algebra-based course, I taught a calculus-based course. And the students could actually solve some pretty complicated problems on the exam, problems that I wasn't sure I would do well on under the pressure of an exam. So 1, they liked me as an instructor. 2, they did well on complicated exam. Obviously, I was doing the right thing. In fact, very quickly, I started to believe that I was the world's best physics teacher. After all, my colleagues were not able to teach this course with the same scores as I was. Now, that turned out to be a complete illusion. A pleasant illusion, of course, but nonetheless, a complete illusion. Nothing could be further from the truth. I actually was a very lousy teacher. That only became clear to me when I gave a precursor of the force concept inventory, a simple test that tests students' understanding of the concept of force with words rather than with equations. And something happened that really made me fall out of my ivory tower. I remember there was one question asking students to compare the force that a heavy truck exerts on a light car, how that force compares to the force exerted by the light car on the heavy truck in a head-on collision. Now, all my students could recite Newton's second law, F12 equals F21. And all my students could use that equation in a problem. But clearly, if you replaced 1 by heavy truck and 2 by light car, they forgot all about it. And most of the students were convinced that the heavy truck exerted a larger force on the light car than the other way around. I figured it out once I saw the results of the test, but actually something happened way earlier than that. As soon as the students started taking that test, one student raised her hand and she asked me, Professor Mazur, how should I answer these questions? According to what you taught us, or according to the way I usually think about these things? You might be laughing about this. I certainly wasn't laughing. In fact, I didn't even understand what the question was about. After all, shouldn't the 2 things be the same? Anyway, that cost quite a bit of introspection and reflection. And this illusion of being a good teacher was shattered within minutes. And upon some further thinking, it became clear to me that my lecturing was actually nothing more than information transfer. I was more or less reading the textbook to the students, and the students were diligently taking notes. In fact, I once heard somebody describe the lecture method as a process whereby the lecture notes of the instructor get transferred to the notebooks of the students without passing through the brains of either. And to some degree, that was true in my class. They were memorizing by rote. They were learning to solve problems by rote. But if I asked anything that was out of the context that they had seen, my students would alarm and say, we've never done a problem like this. But think about it. If they had done a problem like that before, it would by definition no longer be a problem. That made me completely and radically change my approach. You see, education is more than just information transfer. In the traditional approach to education, all of the emphasis is on that step there, the information transfer. But the much more important part is actually the sense-making part. Students need to not just open their skull, put the information in, and then keep it in there long enough to pass the exam. No, they need to extract from that information the mental models, the knowledge that permit them to apply what they've learned. Where did that sense-making take place for you and for me? Think about it. Did that happen while you were listening to your instructor's lecture? Maybe sometimes it did, but probably more often than not, it happened outside of the classroom. So in the traditional approach to teaching, the first step, the information transfer, takes place in class, and then the second step, the sense-making, takes place through study or homework out of class. Now, if you ask yourself the question, which of these two methods is the of these two parts is the hardest, I think we would all agree it's the second part. So it's kind of ironic that most of us in the classroom put the emphasis on the information transfer rather than the sense making. We should focus on that second step. So that made me actually flip back in 1991, so now almost 30 years ago, my approach to teaching. The term flipping the class didn't occur. Didn't exist at that time. In fact, we didn't start using the term until 10 years later. But essentially, rather than reading my notes and the books to the students, I told them, read it before coming to class. In essence, the information transfer was moved out of the classroom. And then in class, I worked on the sense-making part, the aha moments, by teaching through questioning, a method which I termed peer instruction, and which now is used in many schools and colleges all around the world. Long story short, peer instruction became a success. It became used in many different disciplines. First of all, many people have shown higher learning gains. If you do on Google Scholar a search for peer instruction, you will find something like 10,000 peer-reviewed articles in many different disciplines showing gains in learning. In my own class, I measured the normalized gain that I would get on the FCI and other tests during lecturing, about 25%. So that's 25% of the maximum possible gain. And then after switching to peer instruction, I first doubled and eventually tripled that gain. So this is not a 20 or 30% increase. No, it's a 200% increase. And then studies at Carnegie Mellon have shown better retention, because once you have that aha moment, it sticks. The information, the knowledge, I should say, sticks. Now, you may wonder, well, that works for Harvard students. What about community colleges or high school or whatever? Well, I realized very early on that I needed to show that this was not an Ivy League effect. So I teamed up with a postdoc who was actually teaching at a community college, and we compared the Harvard data with the data that he obtained in his class at a community college. So at Harvard University, you see here the normalized gain in the traditional lecture-based classroom and the first year implementation of peer instruction, which doubled the normalized gain. And the equation for the normalized gain is shown on top there. It's defined as the final score minus the initial score divided by 1 minus the initial score. So it's the fraction of the maximum possible gain, averaged, of course, over the whole student. This permits you to compare different population of students. At the community college, they got a similar gain, a normalized gain. The absolute values of the pre-test and the post-test were pre-test being at the beginning of the semester and post-test at the end of the semester were different, but the gain increased substantially. And just as I found at Harvard, they found a gain in exam performance. So the better understanding of the concepts did not go at the expense of better problem solving, even though far less problem solving was done in the classroom. But here's the interesting thing I want to point out. At the community college, they found that it also helped retain students. Dropout rates at community colleges are big. About 20% of the students drops out of their introductory physics course in community college. After implementing peer instruction, however, as you can see here, the percentage of dropouts went from over 20% to 5%. I never looked at my own data because the dropout rate is not very big, but it turned out that there were actually quite a few students who enrolled in the course at the beginning of the term and then never took the final exam. And then when I compared for traditional and peer instruction, I found actually a similar drop even at Harvard. So higher learning gains, better retention of knowledge, better retention of students. Then later I started studying something called self-efficacy. It's one's belief in being able to succeed in a given domain. I think I can do physics if I try hard enough. Now, we physicists tend to have a high self-efficacy in physics, otherwise we would never have continued. Self-efficacy determines how you deal with setbacks and failure. If you have a high self-efficacy, you tell yourself, well, and you don't do that well, you tell yourself, well, I haven't worked hard enough or I have a bad day. If you have low self-efficacy, you just shrug your shoulders and you say, physics is too hard for me. Well, it turns out that students, non-majors who take introductory physics courses tend to have very low self-efficacy, even at a place like Harvard. And in a traditionally lecture-based course, the self-efficacy actually goes down over the course of the semester. So they come out with less self-efficacy at the end than they had at the beginning. Using peer instruction, that actually stabilized. But that still left the problem of low self-efficacy. And that started to get me interested in secondary education. What is it that is happening in high schools? And the situation in high schools is nothing less than critical. Only 1/3 of US high school students takes physics. Only 1/3. We live in a world dominated by technology, yet only 1/3 of high school graduates have even been exposed to physics. In some districts, like New York, believe it or not, over 50% of schools don't even offer physics. And only 1/3 of the schools where physics is offered, only 1/3 of the teachers at those schools have actually physics degrees. No wonder we generate a society that, is horrified by physics. I don't know about you, but when I go to a party and I say I'm a physicist, the first thing I get to hear is, "Oh, physics! I had such a hard time with physics in high school or in college." We have a moral obligation to do something about it, to bridge this gap, to give back to society, and not only to train the next generation of scientists, but to actually train the next generation, period, to educate the people in scientific literacy. So this past summer, with funding from the NSF, I ran a Harvard physics online workshop on education. The name of the workshop was Building a Network to Support and Improve High School Physics Education. The original plan was to have it in person with a small number of teachers, but then we went virtual and realized, hey, we can bring in many more people. So it was attended by 200 high school teachers. And the idea was to start exploring the ideas to form a network of high school teachers by high school teachers for high school teachers, supporting each other and improving the state of high school education teaching. At the end of that workshop, we decided that it would be a good idea to oh, by the way, at the workshop, we had Carl Wyman speak. We had Ellen November, who is a luminary in K-12 education, speak. And we had one of my former group members, Catherine Crouch, who's a professor at Swarthmore College, give a presentation of how to fold the physics curriculum into a life science shell. And that gave us the idea to form a network based on the physics of living system to increase the acceptance, if you want, of physics in high school and to reinvigorate, in a sense, the teaching of physics at high schools. Now, we've met a few times. In fact, yesterday we had a lecture of the PoLS network, and I would like to find ways of bridging the gap between the Physics of Living Systems network and the Physics of Living Systems teacher network. More about that in just a second. I want to jump here for a moment, because just before we ran that workshop, I was actually teaching a team and project-based course. I no longer lecture, as you might imagine. In fact, I no longer even teach in a regular classroom. It's a flat classroom. And in order to increase the intrinsic motivation of these life science majors for physics, it is completely team-based and project-based. Now, when the pandemic hit in March, it all of a sudden became impossible to teach this course. Even if we had been on campus, social distancing would not have been possible, and therefore this type of pedagogy would not have been a viable, or at least a safe, if you want, approach to the pandemic. So it became clear that I could no longer teach the course in the usual way. Students were building things. How could they build something if they were remote? So this year, when I started teaching this course, I thought maybe there's a way that I can combine the different ideas that I just told you about. And for the first project, which was actually 2 weeks ago, which we called At Home with Physics, we basically used as a wrapper for the project the problem in education that was being caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I tasked my students to help teachers who were teaching remote classes and who had their classes remote, to help them develop lesson plans and demonstrations, as well as ideas on how, using a very simple kit, to build equipment and take measurements at home. Now, the fair, which, as I said, was just 2 weeks ago, was attended by over 200 students and teachers. I had the benefit of this budding PoLS network that permitted me to reach out to teachers who were connected. We had 23 high schools participate, spread from US to Mexico, Turkey, Italy, Ecuador. And it was a wonderful way to see how you can bridge higher education and secondary education. And also, what really excited me perhaps the most about it is to see the excitement of my students, being able to give back to society, given how fortunate they were that they could still attend classes that were taught in a pedagogically sound way. In fact, some students brought their own high school teacher to the fair. So my goal in the coming year, and I hope to find ways of involving you, is to build a bridge between high school and university physics. More specifically, to find ways of having the PoLS network and the PoLS team network work together to form a community that lays the foundation for a society that is scientifically literate and is fine with evidence-based science. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hi, I am Isa Gallegos, and I'm going to pick up where Eric left off, and I want to talk to you about some specifics, some early accomplishments that we have done through our PoLS T network initiative. So first, really quickly, and I will return back to this at the end of my presentation and give you a little bit more detail, but what I want to share with you is some of the early findings or the early accomplishments. And these are, number one, we asked our initiative participants, the network participants, what they cared about, what mattered to them, or what areas would they like to focus on to improve high school physics education. And what they told us, and this will likely not be a surprise to very many people here, is that number one, they really care about diversity, equity, and inclusion in rigorous physics education. Number two, they care about collaboration, and collaboration in the sense of being able to collaborate with their peers, other high school educators, physics high school educators, but also in working with physics education researchers at the university level, and then continued support in the form of either materials or curriculum or things they can implement that can support their efforts for changing their pedagogy in their classroom. In addition, the second point here, we coordinated and organized a PoLS T core. So this is a subgroup of participants in the PoLS T network who bring a diverse array of expertise into the room and who can serve as an advisory board or a steering committee. And I'll talk in a second about why that is important. And then finally, we've started coordinating monthly talks. So you might be wondering, as physics education researchers, why did we take this approach? Why did we decide to start to build a community of professional practitioners as opposed to perhaps taking our findings from the classroom? Eric earlier talked about self-efficacy and how it's linked to academic achievement. Why we don't just take the findings that we found in the undergraduate classroom and transfer them into the high school physics classroom. And so this talk is about gaps, and we learned about achievement gaps earlier and self-efficacy gender gaps. Now I want to talk about a gap that's a little bit different, and this is a knowledge gap that we had, or an expertise gap that we have as physics education researchers or educators at the university level. And this is summarized by what Professor Linda Darling-Hammond from Stanford calls the problem of complexity. And what I mean by this is that the environment and the context in the high school setting is so different from what we experience at the university setting that even if we have findings that are well supported by evidence, if we don't understand the context and the pressures, incentives, challenges that high school educators face, we can recommend best practices, but if they cannot be implemented because we don't understand how to account for the context, then they won't be successful. And so I'll say a little bit more about this in terms of closing the gap between our knowledge as physics educators and high school teachers. But what became very obvious to us in having conversations with high school educators was that they deal with a wide, diverse body of students at once. They juggle multiple academic and social goals. And on a day-to-day basis, sometimes moment to moment, they have to make calls and decisions and trade-offs based on their environment. This might all sound familiar to us. We all, as educators, deal with this to a certain extent, but I would argue that the way that this happens in the high school classroom is different from what we experience in our own environments. In addition, high school educators have to answer to mandated school reforms and improvement initiatives, oftentimes without little attention to skills or the types of supports that they need to effectively implement this. And so ultimately, this turns into a time limitation, limitation in resources, and what educators need is to be able to implement things quickly in a way that works for them in their classroom. And so I'll spend the last couple of minutes talking to you, not in depth, but in general terms about the approach we decided to take, which is guided by participatory action research. So as a note, I will clarify that participatory action research, or PAR, is not a prescriptive way of conducting research. All the modes of research are available to us, but it does align us to a set of goals for research where action is the primary focus. So in our case, we want to improve access to quality physics high school education. We want research participants to help shape the research agenda. So this is more than simply being participants. This is being collaborators and colleagues with the people in our network. And so it follows that we have to privilege insider knowledge. And I want to point back here and pause and talk about something that Eric brought up earlier that has to do with this idea of reciprocity, a give and take where all parties are benefited. So Eric talked earlier about inviting high school physics teachers and students into the classroom, into the undergraduate classroom. And so this was important in building our network because rather than coming in and just presenting our researcher identity from the university, and telling people how to do their work, what we wanted to do was to express this collaborative colleague attitude where they could come into our classroom in AP50 and see us be educators as well, so that we could have a common professional experience. Finally, I told you I was going to give you a little bit more detail, and I can talk about this in depth, but in the interest of time, I'll just say that some of our goals for the early stages were modeled after the research in the formation of professional communities of practice by Grossman, Weinberg, and Woolworth. And so here I highlight 3 of the things that need to happen in order to establish effective professional communities. The first is establishing a group identity and norms for interaction. We believe that asking our educators what matters to them and having a core, an advisory core, fulfills the beginning of this requirement. Also formulating a sense of communal responsibility. The monthly talks are organized by us, we coordinate them, but our speakers are people from the network who have domain knowledge in something that is of interest to the group: diversity, equity, inclusion, collaboration, etc. And also third, members need to assume responsibility for their colleagues' growth and development. So this is a third step that we're working on, and it's a part of our future directions. But one of the things that we think could be beneficial in joining our 2 networks, Grow Pulse and the Pulse T network, is that there's an overlap in interest. So we are interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and so are physics high school students. We can envision a collaborative partnership where we have a number of high school physics educators who care about specific research domains, who reach out to the Grow Pulse network, for example, and ask for help in designing a study or helping with assessment. So with that, I'm happy to take your questions about our early efforts, and I'm excited to hear your comments. Thank you.
Let's thank our speakers, Dr. Mazur and Ms. Gallegos. And the floor is open for any questions. Please type them into the chat box and I will read them out.
So can I just say one thing fast? Here, interaction between the two networks. I'm sorry, I was going to type, but one thing Margaret may want to comment, and I think add to your last comment about interactions between the physics of living system network and the physics of living system teachers network, is the idea we have this program at CDVP where undergrads come for research in the summer, and they are assigned to one of our graduate students or postdocs. They work with us. Maybe you could expand the entire PoLS network, and we can bring teachers into the summer to do research. And Margaret's around it. Maybe you guys want to comment a little bit about it, since that's a good topic of discussion.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in. I see Margaret is walking from one room to the other and settling in there. So the NSF actually has a program that mirrors the RU program. Instead of being research experience for undergraduates, it's research experience for teachers. And for many, many years, I'm the PI on one of the Harvard RU programs. And for many years, we included teachers. So in my group, for example, I've had a series of high school teachers who came to the research, usually research in optics, and sometimes research in physics education research. But so there's already an avenue to do that. But I think this would be definitely a great way of having PoLS, support the development of teachers. And there are certainly this summer in the workshop, we heard from quite a few teachers that they would like to update their knowledge and keep current. So I think that's a great idea. I don't know if Margaret wants to add to that, or Isa.
Just a sec.
I think that's a great idea. With a STEP program that Gray we're going to talk about later in the next, that the exposure of research could be just like 2 hours or 1 hour per day, that the teacher get to see what's happening. I think they are communicators. They are great in translating what we are doing in the lab and then communicate that with the students. So I think that expectation of an RET will perhaps has to discuss with the teachers that what did they want it to do with their given amount of time, because you're very busy. Thank you.
But maybe in the summer, Margaret, if we can find some financial support for them during that time, they can actually work and do something on the lab and sort of really improve basically their personally that transmit all that inspiration to the students. We have to think about it. I'm not an expertise on that. You and Eric can tell me more about it, what we can do.
Certainly.
Right, we have a lively discussion in the chat, but I think some of the questions have been answered. We have a question from Greg Morrison, who asks, do you find that most students do engage with the material in the flipped classroom? What do you do if they do not engage?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking that, Greg. The answer is, certainly I find that most students engage. You see, think about the lecture method. How do you know whether or not students engage, right? I mean, essentially you're looking at a sea of faces and it's really very hard to see what is going on in their brain. But anyway, let's just ignore that for now. Let's talk about the engagement. And I presume you mean the engagement with the material before coming to class. So initially, I focused really on the in-class experience, and to me, the engagement that was sort of, or the transfer of information, if I may use that term, was a trivial part of education. I didn't spend much time on it. I did do, however, find that a fraction of the student would happily come to class not having done anything. And my initial my initial reaction to that was exactly the wrong reaction. You know, I would come to class, I would notice that a significant fraction of the students had not done their pre-class assignment, and then I say, oh my God, what am I going to do now? You know what? Let's take 10 minutes to essentially tell them what they should have read, only to discover that it is exactly the wrong thing to do. Because now you're telling the students who don't prepare themselves, don't worry, if you don't do it, Professor Mazur will tell you in 10 minutes what would have taken you a lot longer to do. And you're telling the students who have put in the effort, you fools, you've been wasting your time. And the next time nobody comes to class prepared. So the one thing, the maybe most direct answer to your question is do nothing. Right? I mean, you have to, in a sense, address your own expectations before you address those of your students. And think about it. Think about it. Think back of when you were a student, and think not of the courses in the discipline that you were majoring in, but some other courses you had to take as a requirement. Anything, right? Did you come to class prepared and read the material before class? I'd be really surprised if, you know, for 100% of the lectures you read before. And frankly, I'm not afraid of admitting that publicly, I read 0 before class. Was that because I was lazy or not motivated or because I couldn't read? No. The reason was very simple. I'd be curious to see if somebody has an answer to that. Why did we, when we were students, not read systematically before coming to class? I mean, yeah, I think the answer is pretty simple. The answer is there was no need to, because the professor was reading the book to us, right? I mean, if you read beforehand, you had to sit through hearing what you had read before. So that shows that, you know, the first thing we have to do is change our behavior before we can change the behavior of our students. So that's one thing. In more recent years, however, the past 6 or 7 years, I've started to use a social learning platform, Perusal, and for full disclosure, we developed that. We developed it to solve a problem in my class, and then found that people got interested in it. Now there's something like 1.2 million students using it worldwide, which essentially turns the out-of-class reading or watching, because you can use it with video too, step into a social experience where students can help each other and exchange information with each other. And I've seen a significant uptake in the engagement with the material before class. Is this a trivial matter? As I said in the beginning, no, it's not. And there are many little steps you need to take in order to really make it click. And one is to change the motivation of the students. You know, I've had some students really resist this whole flipping the classroom, right? I mean, I'd had a student a number of years ago who wrote me in I think in week 2 or 3 of the class, this vicious email. Okay, it started with the subject concerns. And then he said, "Dear Professor Mazur, I speak on behalf of many of my classmates." And so on, you know, very well articulated message. And then he said, you know, while I enjoy the interactive questions in class, you know, he thought that, you know, because this is the other thing, right? In a lecture, you're not aware of what you do and don't understand. But once you start answering questions, it's in your face as a student, right? Now, all of a sudden you discover during class time, oh my God, I don't understand this. What do I do if I get a question like this on the exam? So it's much more in your face. And that was clearly very disconcerting to him. So he said that, you know, while he enjoyed the questions, you know, he thought that I think that you should, and then essentially lectures that what you were saying, go over the reading point by point in class. So anyway, I invited him to my office, and I said, look, I showed him the data that you saw at the beginning of the gain when I was lecturing and the gain when I was after I implemented peer instruction. And I said, look, do you want to be there or do you want to be there? And so he looked at it, but by the end of the conversation, it was very clear that I had not convinced him at all. So I I said, let me make you a deal. I have a blackboard in my office, just as, very similar to the blackboard in the classroom. I said, if you want, you can come once a week to my office and I'll write the notes on the blackboard and then you can copy them in your notebook. So he got a big smile on his face, but that didn't convince me. That luckily he did not pick me up on my offer. But then something curious happened. He actually all of a sudden latched onto the method, and he saw the benefits of it, and he saw it's in a sense changing our approach to teaching is like cleaning up a closet you've neglected a long time where things have piled up. As you begin cleaning up, the mess becomes bigger, not smaller, right? And it takes a while before things are getting back in order. And so he latched on, and he ended up being the top scoring student in the class. In fact, I was so excited by his reasoning skills. I saw his final exam and I thought, this student needs to be a physics major. So I asked him to, and he actually sent me an email, thank you, right after final exam. I don't know if I'll get an A or an A minus, but I want you to know you're the best professor I've ever had, blah, 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 and so on. And anyway, so I invited him to my office and I said, you should really consider becoming a physics major. I couldn't talk him out of becoming a surgeon, and we need some smart surgeons too. So I'm quite all right with that. So we need to, change is difficult, and we need to work on it, and we need to prepare people for change, not only instructors but students as well. Thank you for the question. Sorry for the rambling answer.
Thank you. Related to pre-med physics majors or physics students, Monica Makura would like to know, could you comment on the types of physics problems that these college students such as pre-meds are solving? I recently thought about it and I wondered whether there are topics in physiology that could be used to teach physics as opposed to typical problems of two cars hitting each other and so on. Do you think how the concepts are framed by using specific examples matters?
Absolutely. In fact, at the workshop, we had one of my former group members, Catherine Crouch, present on using physics related to the life sciences to teach introductory physics. I think many of the examples that we use in our physics courses date back to the turn of the century, not 20th to 21st, no, 19th to 20th, sorry, the turn of the previous century. And I don't think they're optimum to motivate anyone. And I think helping students to develop a more intrinsic reason for study is very important than simply having an extrinsic motivation through grades. And one of the ways of doing that is by framing the problems that we give them, by framing the projects. That's why I try to have this wrapper around my projects that puts my projects in a societal context, in the context of a societal problem. I absolutely, but here's the big problem, right? You can pick any random textbook and there are lots of cars colliding and balls rolling down incline. There are very few examples of problems in a life science context. So developing more material in a context that's more relevant to our students, I think will go a long way towards motivating people for our discipline, which I won't have any need to convince you, I think is at the heart of doing science.
Thank you. There's a question from Vernita Gordon, who says, I've recently finished a 3-year project in which I compared outcomes for an introductory mechanics course, comparing peer instruction through small group discussions versus interactive lectures, that is me with the class as a whole. I found that peer instruction was associated with worse outcomes for URMs, first generation low income students, also worse outcomes for students with below median SAT scores. I'm heartbroken about this. I suspect that this may arise from the very high level of heterogeneity in prior background in my physics classroom. From UT Austin's unique admissions policy, plus I'm teaching a class for physics majors, but most of the students are non-physics majors. Hurting underrepresented, disadvantaged students by using peer instruction was the last thing I wanted. This isn't really a question, but do you have anything to say about this?
I have a lot to say about this. In fact, I had one of my former graduate students, she's now on the faculty at Tufts, write her thesis about the effect of peer instruction on underrepresented minorities. You see, back in the, I think, late 90s, we did research on how peer instruction helped close the gender achievement gap, not by getting the males down and the women up, no, by getting both up, pulling up the female students disproportionately, so that the initial gap at the beginning of the term became no longer statistically significant at the end of the term. And that immediately gave the idea to also look for Hispanic and Black African-American students to see what the effect was on those two groups. And just like you, we found that that for Hispanic and African-American students, the effect was, not there. There was no closing of the gap. And in part, we attributed that to the fact that the grouping in peer instruction is completely self-selected, right? I mean, you sit next to the in a classroom. We had no I don't know how it is in your classroom, certainly in our classroom, we didn't tell students where to sit and who to talk to. We tried it one year and students didn't take kindly there. They said, we want to determine who we talk to and where we sit. So I think that the self-selected grouping is actually detrimental. So Isa and I are now working on a different approach. We still use peer instruction, but it's folded inside team-based learning. And we actually control, this is one of Isa's research project as a doctoral student at Harvard, to actually look how to optimize working in teams and how to form teams and how to find a way of getting people in a team to work together better and learn from each other better. And there we control the teams, we form the teams. And certainly diversity is important. And which is actually, maybe Isa, you want to say a little bit more about it, because it fits the theme of this conference so well. And what is happening in society around us is clearly showing that this is important. Teaching people how to work with each other is something that is typically not done either at the secondary or at the post-secondary level, but it's crucially important for how society functions. So what I want to say is that now what we do is we are actually controlling who works together, who talks together, and we find actually, I think, a higher gain. It's too early to really say, but we find a bigger benefit to underrepresented minorities.
Yeah, I can add something to that if it's okay. Another way that we're starting to look at our data, and this is in the initial stages, is dividing the groups depending on the kinds of learning goals or performance goals they have. So we still look into ethnicity, but one of the things that we're exploring is if we have a couple of subsets of students where their learning trajectory looks quite different depending on the goals they have initially. And we think this might have implications for students who are underrepresented, where students who are underrepresented and have learning goals tend to do better than students who are underrepresented and have performance goals in the class.
Okay, let's thank our speakers again, and thank you everyone for the lively discussion.
Thank you.
I can already see some collaborations being formed through the chat window, and we can continue this through the Slack channel. Our next speaker is Dr. Greg Morrison, who is an assistant professor of physics at the University of Houston, where he works on applying tools from statistical physics and network theory to understand biological systems. Before starting his lab at the University of Houston, Dr. Morrison got his PhD in physics from the University of Maryland in College Park, co-terps. In addition to his biophysics research, Dr. Morrison is the co-director of the STEM Teacher Equity Project for Physics, or STEP, which trains high school physics teachers in taking an inquiry-based pedagogical style to their classroom teaching. We will now hear about this program from Dr. Morrison.
Hi, my name is Greg Morrison. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Houston in the Department of Physics. And today I'm going to be talking about a project that I was working on that I was previously involved in, a collaboration between physics and education departments at the University of Houston, called the STEM Physics Equity Project, or STEP Physics, directed at improving education outcomes for underprepared teachers in high needs districts. So let me first give a sense of why it is that such a program is even needed. So it's been well recognized that in the United States there is a high need for well-trained STEM teachers in primary and secondary education. So this perhaps the first significant call for a national program was in 2007 with the National Academies of Sciences Rising Above the Gathering Storm, where it was noted that in physics and chemistry, an enormous fraction of teachers do not have certification in the courses that they teach. And so over the past decade, there has been a push to improve the ratio of teachers that are certified and do have a degree in the course that they teach. However, improvement has only been modest in the past 10 to 15 years. So this is, we could see that in 2013, this was on the order of 45%. And in 2015, we can see that well over half of students had a teacher that did not have a degree in physics, had a physics teacher that did not have a degree in physics. And fully a third had a teacher that had even no certification in physics. And so one of the main thrusts to address this issue is to train new teachers and put them in a position where they are where they do enter the education workforce. And so there are a number of excellent programs that exist both at University of Houston and across the country, UTeach being a primary example and Teach Houston being our version of UTeach. So these programs are excellent. However, it is often the case that these highly qualified teachers go to districts with resources. And in Texas and across the country, historically underserved school districts suffer a significant gap in the resources they have available per student. And so this is a particular recent in 2019 estimate of on the order of $1,000 less per student in a highly diverse school than a primarily white school district. I was actually surprised whenever I read this, because this is actually not bad in comparison to the rest of the country, which to me is an even more shocking figure. But in Texas, this was something that we recognized was important to address. And this gap in education outcomes can also be seen in the performance on standardized tests such as the ACT. And so this graph shows the percent of students that performed sufficiently well on the ACT STEM benchmarks, given that they had, given the number of diversity indicator, given the number of disadvantaged diversity indicators. So this includes racial statistics as well as financial statistics, and with 0 of these disadvantaged indicators, the performance was, so clearly 50% is not stellar, but is still a significant improvement over these other over the presence of having more than one of these indicators. And so this attrition rate increases the more of these indicators that one has. Now, this is a problem in the Houston area and across the country, but this is a particular example. Here, this school district is primarily is 1/3 non-white, while this school district, Aldine, is 98% white. Right? The difference, is 98% non-white. Here, this school district is 1/3 white versus essentially 0% white. The students here, the populations are comparable. The poverty rate is higher in this district, and the the money per student is significantly lower for the more diverse than the lower poverty district. Right. So this is not something that any individual university, any individual outreach program can address. Right. There's no way for us to solve the financing problems of the current education system in the United States. What we can do is recognize that this need exists and approach these school districts, work with them to try to improve the abilities of the teachers that currently exist in those districts. Right? So this is a second path to try to promote equitable knowledge, equitable teaching skills in all school districts. And so what was done at the University of Houston, we came up with something called the STEP Physics Program. This is the STEM Teaching Equity Project. This was essentially a 2-week summer program coupled with a year-long set of lessons, 120 hours of training in total over the entire year, covering either the first semester of physics or the second semester of physics. So Newton's laws, kinematics, conservation of energy in the first year, and electrostatics, optics, and these sorts of things in the second year. This program was taught using active learning techniques, which is something I'm going to describe in just a moment. We targeted underrepresented, underprepared teachers in districts where a high fraction of demographically disadvantaged students were found. So this included, for instance, a high fraction of school lunch programs. And so in particular, you can see the strangely shaped district that I had just showed you is I believe this one. Let's see. This was led. So these sessions were led by faculty from the Department of Physics, faculty or graduate students from the College of Education at the University of Houston, as well as involvement of expert teachers in the school districts themselves. So active teaching techniques is one of the important components of the STEP Physics program. And so I want to briefly talk about why it is that we focused on teaching them active learning techniques as opposed to traditional lecture. Right? So a traditional lecture, I would explain the underlying physics, and then and you would watch me write this on a whiteboard or a chalkboard, and then the students would go home, do the homework, and that would be the first time that they themselves are interacting with the problem, right? The first time that they encounter having to think through the actual process and not just watch me do it is when I'm not in the room, when I cannot possibly help them, right? And so active learning essentially asks the students to be engaged during the lecture. And so the students will be asked questions, they'll have to respond to prompts, they'll have to talk to other students about the answers that they gave to those prompts, and they'll have to creatively interpret whatever they're given. So in some cases, this will be a set of questions, in some cases, this will be a set of experiments, right? But given this, it has been shown in a variety of publications that these active learning techniques are significantly beneficial in comparison to traditional lecture techniques, right? So this is one particular example. These are the same set of classes. These are the percent change in the failure rate of students with active learning in a variety of STEM classes. So essentially, fewer students fail if one takes an active learning approach as opposed to a traditional lecture approach. This is the distribution of the fractions of students that failed. And what we essentially can see is that there is a significant improvement on the order of a 50% risk ratio, there's a 50% improvement in the failure rate of students in these classes if active learning is used. Right? Students that are involved in active learning, this IDL stands for interactive lecture demonstration. And once again, so this IDL means that that active learning techniques were used. The question here was, IDL helps me understand a concept better. And this is a list of concepts that were asked about. And overwhelmingly, the students agreed that the active learning techniques did help them understand the concept. Okay. And so I want to give a couple of very brief examples of active learning techniques to hopefully give you a sense of why these things are useful, and also hopefully to make sure that you are currently awake. So one example are these conceptual questions, right? So in a conceptual question, I am going to first review the topics that we have already discussed to make sure that you are recalling relevant knowledge that you already have, but that you yourself have encountered in previous lectures. I'm then going to ask you a multiple choice question, and I'm going to give you the chance to answer that anonymously. Now, the anonymity matters quite a bit because some students that are struggling do not want to raise their hands. In fact, many students don't want to raise their hands, even if they're doing well. But having this anonymous means that all students are able to participate. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first point out that hopefully we're all reasonably familiar with centrifugal motion, but this is centrifugal force and centripetal motion. Right? The centripetal force is inward, the centrifugal force is outward. So if I'm driving in a car and I steer to the left, I move to the right. If I am driving in a car and I decelerate, I am pushed forward. If I am driving in a car and I accelerate, I am pushed backwards. Right? So there's a difference in the force that is felt by me in the car and the direction of the motion. So we imagine now that you are familiar with centrifugal force, and now I'm going to ask you a multiple choice question. Now, I'm not going to say anything for the next 45 seconds. You're going to have 45 seconds to answer this. There's going to be a poll that appears either in front of your screen or or in the chat box. But there's going to be a poll where you're going to have the opportunity to answer this conceptual question. Okay, so here we go. So only 15 seconds left. So if you have no idea, pick something. Okay, so we've hit time, and so hopefully you put something into the poll. Okay. Now, one thing to point out, again, it's important for this to be anonymous so that every student will commit. Because the commitment really matters. The student buying into the question, buying into the thought process, and picking something means that they are more likely to care about the outcome, right? Than if I were to just tell them the answer. Now, normally, if this were in person, I would ask you to convince your neighbor that you're right, and I would point out that just because you and your neighbor agree doesn't make you right. Of course, this is an asynchronous talk right now. It's pre-recorded, so I cannot do that. And generally speaking, I would give you a few minutes to talk, and then I would ask people to re-vote. And particularly if there was a large fraction correct, right? If 90% get the answer right, there's no reason to re-vote. But if it's an even 33% across all three answers, well, it's valuable to re-vote. Okay, and then after the re-vote, typically I would tell you the answer, and so that's what we're going to do here. This is a video of a car turning to the left. You can see that the balloon is moving to the left. The person would be feeling a centrifugal force to the right. And so this is actually a demonstration of what's called the equivalence principle. This is a very nice example of, you can see that he turned to the right, I'm sorry, over here, and the balloon moved as well. This demonstrates that forces are equivalent, right? So there's nothing special about the gravitational force, right? The gravity pulls air down and the balloon moves up relative to the air. In the car, the exact same thing is true. The air feels a centrifugal force to the right whenever the car is turning to the left, and so the balloon moves to the left. Okay, so this is one example of how this can be demonstrated. Another class of problems that we do in active learning are inquiry style learning, where the students build an experiment. Right? So one of the first ways that students typically are going to encounter the idea of magnetic induction is through a picture something along these lines, right? This is a complicated looking figure. There's a lot of moving parts, but we imagine generally that we have current moving through this loop. The loop is put inside of in between two poles of a magnet. That creates a magnetic field. Because of the moving charge, that causes a torque on the loop, which can be converted into mechanical work, right? This is sort of a classic collection of problems. These are difficult to understand on a page, right? The student has to, first of all, be confident about what's being said about torque. They need to use the right-hand rule in order to do this, which students always have a problem with. And then there are even unfamiliar terms in this picture that we've never talked about in class, these brushes and metal slip rings, right? And so in inquiry physics, essentially we hand them the tools to build something along these lines, but don't tell them necessarily exactly what to do. Instead, we give guidance. We suggest how to build a simple device, and I'll give an example in a moment. After that, we ask the students what-if questions. What if we vary this or that? And the students then are able to determine some underlying principle. So as an example, this is an example of an inquiry experiment. So I've got a metal screw with some string tied around it, neodymium magnets, unshielded copper wire, and something to cut the wire with, as well as a AA battery. Right. This experiment is very inexpensive. The batteries are $1. The magnets are $1, and essentially this can be shared. This experimental the elements of this experiment can be easily found in any hardware store or on Amazon, right? And all of these elements can be used for other experiments as well. Okay, so we're going to take these elements and we're going to perform the following experiment. Stretch a wire. I'm just going to clip a piece of wire, and what I'm going to do is essentially create the homopolar motor that was described, or something similar to the homopolar motor that was described in the textbook. But I'm going to do it in such a way that you don't need the right-hand rule to understand what's going on. You don't have to have a sense of torque. This is just essentially, we're going to see the torque happening without having to design anything complicated, right? So the magnet is on the bottom, that magnetizes the metal screw. That means that I can attach that to the battery. Now here, basically, I'm going to show you this. That's the piece of wire I just cut. Instead, I'm just going to use the one that I practiced with so that I make sure that the experiment goes well. I touch this to the top and the bottom, and hopefully you can see that here the screw is spinning. You can see more clearly because the string is spinning around. This demonstrates exactly the same principle. There's an asymmetry in the magnetic field in this particular loop. So in this experiment, only half of the loop is closed. But there's an asymmetry in the magnetic field, and that's what's giving rise to the torque. Right? There's a number of experiments that you could do using this sort of approach, and these things can be done at home. In fact, this setup part could be done asynchronously. Although the full inquiry lesson does require that you can interact with the students, but that can be done online. Okay, so there are a number of these benefits of active techniques. So there are, hopefully this convinces you that there are statistically significant, meaningful measures of improvement. And hopefully the previous two slides at least gave you a sense that, well, that could be fun, right? That could be engaging and possibly help you understand some physical principles, right? So why doesn't everyone do this? Well, the reason why is because it's hard. Right? It's difficult for us, the teachers, to learn how to do this well because we weren't taught this way typically. And the students themselves also have to struggle in class. They have to think about the answers to things. They have to talk to each other. And so students tend to do well in the active learning classes, right? That's what this this darker bar essentially says. This is statistically significant improvement. However, this is statistically significant decrease in sort of happiness, of satisfaction with the lecture. You feel like you're not doing as well because you're struggling more, right? So it's important for high school, for secondary school teachers to have the ability to practice this, right? So what we've done in the STEP program is we teach them not only the content knowledge, and here we're showing essentially the improvements in content knowledge of these teachers that pass through the STEP program. But we also teach them about the outcome, the pedagogy that allows this improved teaching method to be brought into their classrooms, right? There's a number of advantages as well for the University of Houston. We invite we invite high schoolers to come to the University of Houston, and that sometimes is the first time they've ever even thought about coming to college, and it may be UH. We also, all of our faculty that participate in this program now have some experience with active learning techniques as well, and many have brought it into their own classrooms. One other thing to point out, in these high needs districts, these teachers are often overworked, and we need to, in order to recruit these participants, we need to make it clear what they get out of the program, right? The STEP program satisfied all the state requirements for professional training. We gave them the kits, and so all of the neodymium magnets, we would hand them those kits. They can bring it into their classroom directly, along with the lesson plans that they use to learn this stuff. And then finally, we do give them a stipend for their participation, because this is 120 hours. That's a lot to ask anyone to give up for free. So finally, I just want to thank everyone that organized this. The STEP Physics program was originally conceived by Margaret Chung, Wallace Dominy, and Rebecca Forrest, and they were integral to this. Faculty in the physics department at the University of Houston really played a big role in making this a successful program, as well as all of the teachers and school districts that were willing to participate and be involved. And I want to also thank you for your time, and I look forward to talking to you in a moment.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for a fun interactive talk. If anyone has questions, please type them into the chat.
I have a kind of a meta question, maybe not metaphysical, but a meta question.
Sure.
One of the things that I noticed, in fact, in the example that was shown, I think one of the problems of relating to, when I try to teach anyway, to people, is I like to use real world examples and move up to some kind of problem that is in the real world. But one of the problems is that the real world is very complicated. Many times your first impression of what the answer is wrong. It's not because the laws of physics are wrong, but you haven't applied them in enough stages. So I kind of worry a little bit about this idea that one can more or less directly learn everything by doing experiments and asking questions without going through those multiple levels of analysis. I thought the example with the balloon was a very clear one. I think we got lots of answers from well-trained physicists that were showing that we had no idea which way the balloon was supposed to move. And I think that shows that we're professionals. That we understand that there's many steps in this process. Is it going to be that the air is the biggest effect, or is it going to be that the balloon is the biggest effect? Is it going to be, so there's all kinds of stuff like that. And I think that meta lesson is important for people to learn, but I think it's hard to communicate it. Yeah.
It is very difficult to communicate these things, and it is helpful to have. I'm afraid I didn't cite the book that some of these questions come out of, but there are a number in physics education research. There are a number of people who are actively looking to determine what are good questions. What kinds of questions can you ask that address this hierarchy of sort of knowledge? Because one level is that the balloon moves, of course, and the next level is the direction of the motion, and then the next level is the cause of that direction of motion, right? And so these different levels of hierarchy are something that with active learning, you try to draw out of the students themselves, but you do need a well-designed question, I think, and that is hard to do. But there are people that are thinking about this. I'll try to find the citation for this and include.
That would be great. I see this problem more in chemistry, where especially I ask introductory people, I've taught introductory chemistry for non-science majors, but not for science majors.
Okay.
And when I've listened to people who teach it for science majors, they often say, oh, here's an interesting problem. And then they say, here's the answer that I expect the students to have. And I say, that's a wonderful answer, it's just wrong. And it just happens all the time. Now that's because chemistry is more complex than certain parts of physics, and biology is more complex than chemistry, and biological physics is sort of a thing that tries to build these together. So I'm a little, it just seems like a question people should be spending time trying to think about. I don't know how to answer it with the social experiments or anything, but it seems like an issue.
Peter, this is Dave. How do you deal with that then when you know it's not correct, but you want to transmit something to the freshman, for example? How do you deal with that?
I have this problem with honesty. And I usually say, this is what some people will tell you. And then I explain why this is not really right and why I won't be able to explain the right answer to you. I don't get good teaching ratings, so it's not, so if the goal of this is to get good teaching ratings, I think there's a problem. On the other hand, I've had a few students say, like in the non-majors class, oh, that's the first class I ever had, as far as they were concerned, like someone who told them the straight truth to the extent you know it, but left some questions unanswered. Maybe Eric Mazur has more to say about this kind of question. It must come up at Harvard all the time.
I typed in some thoughts in the chat, but while you were engaged in discussion, I think it really all boils down to whether one wants to teach the content of physics or really more physics as a way of thinking. Right. And you know, one of the big problems and the big traps that we physicists fall into continuously is to think of our students as mini-me's, as, you know, people who are going to become like us. Most of them will not. You know, I think 99% of students in an introductory physics course are not going to be physicists. They have a very different motivation for taking a physics course than we had, and they probably will have very different interests too. So what is more important is it that we educate the 0.5% who will be like us and who will make it through whichever way we teach, or will we focus on the 99.5% who are not going to be professors of physics and who generally have very different needs, who will probably forget most of what we teach, just like we forgot most of what we learned in courses that were not in our major field. So I'm starting to believe more and more that we should teach physics as a way of thinking, as a process, rather than you know, just a content, really like a reasoning skill, which is useful outside of the boundaries of our discipline, and which could add value to whatever career our students are taking. And in that respect, I think content becomes much less relevant, and we can actually focus on actively engaging the mind the way Greg was describing.
I think there's also value in that. One of the goals that we must have when interacting with high school is improving just broadly scientific literacy, right? Just a sense of, you know, what physics is and how the world works. And these conceptual ideas, I think, are much more useful for improving scientific literacy than throwing an equation at them and you know, oh, well, why is it 1/2 AT squared? Oh, you know, that can introduce confusion that is not fundamentally necessary to understanding force balance or any of these things, right? The concepts, I think, can be taught more effectively than the math in many cases.
So Greg, many of these people teaching physics are not physics majors, right? The teachers have other majors. How do you deal with that on the context of when you train them?
Again, it's so the approach that we take is because of this inquiry style, some of the teachers come in already knowing knowing sort of the answer, right? So if we take the example of DC circuits, right? Some people know, generally speaking, if you connect a light bulb versus 2 light bulbs, that increases the resistance. And some teachers know what's going to happen, but others simply do not, right? And so we ask them to build these things, to build these circuits, predict what's going to happen. And sometimes they can understand, sometimes the prediction is correct, sometimes incorrect, which is exactly the experience that they have with their students. And so because we give them the supplies, the kits that they've already learned from, they've experienced the struggle of actually figuring this stuff out. And so even if they don't have a background in physics, they're able to take not only the knowledge they've learned from doing the experiment, but also the experience of struggling with the experiment to more effectively teach it within their classrooms. Now, all that being said, we do tell them about Ohm's law. In the end, we do write down the math, and so they're also able to talk about the mathematics, but the concepts are where we start, and that is more helpful to those that have less experience in physics.
All right, we have time for one more question, preferably from a student.
So I did the whole STEP program, and first of all, it was amazing. I think I learned so much from it. And anybody who has not done it, anybody who, if you need help to like spread the word, I want to definitely help spread that word. But I do want to make one very quick comment. I think another problem we have in physics is, even at the high school level, I teach high school physics, right? Is whenever we say conceptual physics, there's this assumption that conceptual physics is the lower level of physics classes you'll take, right? Like, and I think that causes a problem because conceptual physics actually is tougher because it's not a math course, it is a physics course at the end of the day, right? To actually get to the depth. So, but what do we do about the fact that students come in like, oh, conceptual physics, this is supposed to be an easy class. Mathematics, it's supposed to be a hard one. Like, is that something STEP has thought about, or?
Well, so the evidence related to exams says that, so the students in the active learning and passive learning classes always take the same exams in all of these studies. And so you learn just as much math in principle. So there may be additional things you learn in a passive lecture that's more mathematical than you do in an active lesson. But the mathematics required for understanding the underlying physics, the content knowledge that you learn is greater than or equal to in active learning and passive learning, right? So because these are the same exams, it's not like we're only asking them questions about conceptual things. They also learn the math. With active learning, generally, the idea is to get to the concept first and then do the math. And that is often not the way that it is presented in a passive lecture. Right? A passive lecture, you're standing at a whiteboard and it's hard to sketch a concept, right? But it's very easy to write an equation. And so I would say that convincing the student, so it is hard to convince the students, and this is something that Dr. Mazur was talking about, essentially trying to convince, trying to use data to convince a student that this is to their benefit. And sometimes you won't be able to. But when talking to a student that is uncertain, it's, I think, useful to explain that we're still going to do the same things, we're doing it in a different order, right? We want concept first, I want you to understand the underlying physics so that we can build off of that, instead of trying to understand the math from the beginning.
Right, we'll do one quick last question from Karim Mehrabiani. How do you teach students to formulate questions at different levels of abstraction? Is there a general method, or does it vary with the personality of the student? What if students don't know how to formulate questions verbally?
So when it comes to these experiments, so with the motor experiments, so first of all, there are multiple different kinds of motor experiments that one could use. I actually had to clip one of the motor experiments. And so if my explanation of the particular origin of the torque was a little unclear, it referred to a different experiment that wasn't actually presented. So I apologize for that. Let's see, so the goal with inquiry learning is to force the students to be actually engaged, hands-on, trying to answer a question. But it's also important for the teacher to be the one asking the questions and trying to guide them to get to the answer. And so if you have a student that is having that has a difficult time verbalizing, first, it's important for them to be working in groups and for you to stop by these groups and try to engage with them, right? Every student should say something out loud to you or to their group members, right? The other question was, and whether or not it varies student to student, it absolutely does. Some students, all of us have this experience in our classrooms. Some students are really just naturally fantastic. They know, they just have a sense of what's going on, and others struggle. And it is important to try to engage with the talented and struggling students, and you need to do so in different ways. And one way, so when it comes to speaking to struggling students, the idea of anonymity is helpful because, so this is one of the values of the conceptual questions, right? But whenever it comes to these little mini experiments, you can talk to that student individually where it's not, they're not in front of a big crowd, right? You're talking to just them in front of one or two other people. And so it's less intimidating and you are engaging directly with them. But overall, the idea is to ask leading questions and get them, and try to lead them to an answer that addresses the underlying physics.
All right, let's thank Dr. Morrison again.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Ms. Celestina Pangan, who is currently a teacher at Chavez High School in Houston, and she's also pursuing a master's degree in physics with an emphasis on teaching at Texas A&M University at Commerce. She has taught several STEM classes, physics, chemistry, biology, and forensic science, and has over 22 years of teaching experience. Ms. Pangan holds a bachelor's degree in secondary education from Universidad de Santa Isabel in the Philippines, a Master of Arts degree in science education with a focus on physics from the Western Governors University. And she will talk to us about her journey teaching physics at a Title I school.
I'm Celestina. I will talk about my transformative journey teaching in a Title I school. First, let us define what a Title I school is. Title I school is federally funded, serves high numbers of economically disadvantaged children. Federal funds assist schools in meeting the educational needs of students living near or at poverty levels. Its goals are to ensure that high-risk students meet at least the minimum proficiency on state academic standards and assessments, and that they have a fair opportunity to earn high-quality education. Who are my students? My students are classified as at risk, recent immigrants, first-generation graduates, and they are also dreamers. The at-risk students, these are students who are requiring temporary or ongoing intervention to succeed academically. They usually belong to dysfunctional family. They are usually homeless. They're helping parents to pay bills. They usually work full-time job. They are teenage parents, gang members, drug users or dealers, juvenile delinquent, and some of them are suffering mental health problems such as depression. While our recent immigrants, these are the English language learners who required a lot of assistance to succeed in the US classroom, where the medium of instruction is English, and the school culture may be different from their home country. First-generation graduates are students who are the first in the family to graduate from high school. And our students are also dreamers. They have big dreams, just like their non-Title I school peers. Hence, they need the same quality of preparation to chase their dreams and compete globally. What are my challenges being in a Title I school? There are challenges that teachers face in their school. The challenges I face may not be unique at all, and these are scarce learning resources. And if there's scarce learning resources, learning will be limited as well. Student motivation. The lack of it is a lingering challenge, I think, by any teacher. And again, it may not be unique to my situation. The class size. The teacher to student ratio is a problem in a Title I school. There was even an instance that I had to inform my assistant principal to not add students in one class because I no longer had desks for them, meaning the class is already beyond capacity. We face this problem due to inadequate number of teachers teaching the class, particularly physics class. Not having a lab classroom or being a floater is also another challenge that I face. There were times I had to be in a 10 by 10 classroom. This is 10 meter by 10 meter classroom with 30 plus students. So the space is not ideal for labs or hands-on activities. Hence, I always have to be strategic all the time in the use of space in my classroom. At one point, I was a floater, thus it was more challenging to go from one classroom to another, especially if there was a scheduled hands-on activities. So what my students taught or teach me, they taught me compassion, creativity, resourcefulness, motivation. For compassion, I define it as empathy with action. As I witness the ugly situations my students are in, I learn to develop compassion, understanding for and rapport with them. Because of this, helping them to be academically successful became much easier. Identifying the difficulty my students are facing helps me provide the proper interventions so they become successful in my class. Creativity. With the challenges I face regarding limited learning resources, rather than making it a source of frustration, I designed lessons that will motivate student learning. When I had no lab room, I would use the hallway or I would take my students outside the building to have their activities. I did not allow these barriers to impede the learning of my students. Resourcefulness. Resourcefulness with time is when students are needing tutorials, I would be available for them during lunchtime or during after school. If the learning materials is scarce, I would make my students rotate so everyone can perform the activity. At times, I would spend out of my own pocket to buy materials I would need for activities. Yes, I must allocate budget for these materials, but so long as my students learn from the activities, I think it is worth the money spent. Motivation. As I learn more about my students and their needs, they motivate me to go the extra mile, to look for and attend professional development specific to the subject I teach, or simply learning new things. This can be a new skill or a new teaching strategy. I will do this so I can provide them quality education and learning in my classroom, and I also want to prepare them to post-secondary education. So how did Title I school transform me? I aspire for my own growth and development by constant desire to improve my practice every year, if not every day. A more reflective practitioner to offer a better version of myself to my students, and the students motivate me so I can motivate them. Although Title I school elicited my transformation, this would not happen if there are no opportunities available to me. They said a teacher whose learning supports student learning. I am eager to learn, so when I could not find content-specific professional development, I would look for ways to improve my classroom management and my pedagogy for effective learning. When I finally found a professional development that concentrated on physics education through University of Houston STEM Teaching Equity Program, I transformed 360 degrees. Hence, I can say that the program played a very significant role in my transformation. I was able to improve my practice and provided rich learning experience to my students. The year-long program enhanced my understanding of physics concepts, inquiry-based learning, and cooperative learning. The program helped me overcome my dilemma in teaching a material that I lack proper training for, or teach it that will excite students and appreciate physics. In my constant desire to improve my practice, I attended the program with commitment and with dedication because in my mind, the people who will benefit the most are my students. So what am I aiming at in this short talk? I know that there are many teachers out there who are in Title I school teaching physics, who have met the minimum requirement of being science certified teacher, at least in the state of Texas. That's just what you need to do to be able to teach physics class, but do not have proper physics training and perhaps not getting enough help or assistance from colleagues because those teachers are the sole teachers in their respective schools. How will they be reached out? How will this august group of people in this conference be able to reach out to them? Because seriously, the ones who are really affected are the students. I was just lucky to have found the UH STEP on its last 2 years of the program. But had I not moved to Houston, I may still be in limbo, teaching physics the way I think I know it, with all my misconceptions or my erroneous understanding of concepts. The following are my students' feedback about the class after receiving the STEP year-long professional development. And they are the ones who are benefiting a lot from that change that I had, from that transformation that I had. This opportunity sticks in my mind the most because I really learned the most about methodology and analysis during this project. The class was a great experience overall. Now I'm into my 3rd year of physics, so I think it was worth it. I found it inspiring that you were able to teach us every day while you do your graduate school. Something that I like about physics class were that most of the time it is interactive, whether it was a lab assignment or simply answering questions. It was exciting to learn new concepts in her class because we were able to see fun visual demonstration and conduct students-driven experiment to better visualize and engage in the lesson. I love being able to go to her class and know that at the end of the day, I would have learned something I never knew I could have learned. She provided visuals and presentations, had a lot of projects and activities that were enjoyable and not boring. It gave me hands-on experience through working on lab experience and projects. It made me feel more prepared for future classes and college work. Taking pre-IB physics also helped me open my mind and ask questions about how the world around me works. You always reminded us to do our homework and to make sure we ask questions if we have trouble with our work. You were a very supportive teacher, and I'm glad that I had a teacher like you. Thank you for listening to my brief talk about my transformative journey teaching in a Title I school. I can now answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pangan. Ms. Pangan is an alumna of the STEP physics program, so we can see the program in action through her work. This is very inspiring. Thank you so much. We'd like to now take questions through the chat, and priority will be given to students. So if you type in your question and identify yourself as a student, I will make sure to ask your questions first. While we're waiting for questions, I have a quick question to ask Ms. Pangan. When you go back to your school to teach, how do your interactions with your colleagues go? Do you think one can kind of train their colleagues to also adopt this same teaching methodology that you've learned and adopted?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. I tried showing it to my colleagues on my on my first year with STEM, I believe. Yeah, I showed them what I was doing with that STEP program. So I even shared to them the different strategies. I said, why don't we just try it so that you can have better engagement with the students? Because you know, your greatest evaluator are your students, not really your appraisers, and students talk. So the tendency of the student is they compare their classes with their peers, and how come you're doing this, and how come in our physics class we're not doing this? So it hurts me to do that. So I would tell my colleagues back then, why don't we try this? Maybe it will help. But again, it depends on the teacher. How I develop myself is because of my own doing, because I want to always be giving the best for my students, a good learning experience or best learning experience in physics, because I never had that great experience in some of my classes. So that's the only goal I have, just to enjoy teaching the kids and at the same time them enjoying learning in my class. And that's why I attended that STEP program with so much dedication, and I was really following to the book what they were asking us as a requirement, and I was doing it. I was even stressing myself over it because we have an assignment to have to submit, and I have to plan the lesson, and we have to really plan the lesson the way it's supposed to be, applying the knowledge that we got from the training, and at the same time applying the strategies that they are recommending for us. Because to be honest, to get out of your comfort zone is difficult. And sometimes getting out of your comfort zone will benefit the students we teachers tend to just be within their comfort zone or in their bubble because it's something comfortable, as we said. And, you know, like just like the students, we are afraid to fail too. We're scared of that. Yeah.
Thank you. Jonathan Pickett asks, how do you deal with students who do not want to be there at all?
Oh, I really, yeah, I have to call parents. That's another thing. But then again, if you are always giving hands-on activities to the students, something that will really, because these kids, they want to get out, you know, they just want to stand up. They just bored sitting down. So you have to make the physics exciting for them. So they're always looking forward for activities. Every time they enter my classroom, what are we going to do today, miss? They're always asking me that. So sometimes if it is not a hands-on activity, I do demonstrations with them. And in that demonstration, I ask them questions, you know, to start knowing what they know, you know, getting what they know, and, you know, for some, what do you call that, their prior knowledge, to get their prior knowledge. And then from there we expand. And then of course, there will be some questions like, what? They don't really grasp it. It's really difficult to explain to regular kids about the collision of an object of different mass that they receive the same amount of force. That's difficult for them to understand it because what they're seeing is not what is the science is explaining. So they're basing their knowledge to what they experience in real life, not what the science that they know of. So that took me a while, especially if you're teaching regular kids. Concept to them is sometimes too much. So how will you dumb it down that you can reach to their level and appreciate so the physics?
Thanks. And that's related to Arvind's question, who asks, what techniques do you find useful in solving quantitative problems? I ask this because tests like the SATs are the scores most universities use as proxies for a student's ability.
Okay, yeah. I also, in my regular kids, I told them, I know some of you will not go to college. You're not probably thinking of college, but one day probably you will attend college. So I will just prepare you nonetheless the way I prepare my pre-IB kids and my IB kids. That's what I would tell them. There's always rigor in my class. So there's math. The math, I also teach them manipulation of equation. I explain to them why these variables are moving here and there and what's happening. And then at the same time, also explain that equation connected to the concept that we're learning. One scenario we had is when I was explaining to them the collision of two billiard ball, which I actually hang in the classroom. I have to be just creative just to demonstrate that to my students. So I explained it to them. They got the concept, but the moment I threw the math in that concept, a lot of them, I lost them. And that's what their evaluation is. I understood the concept, but the moment you threw the math in that concept, I already got lost. That's what they said, because I asked them as an exit ticket, what did they learn that day? And yeah, what do they still have as as difficulty understanding? And that's what they said. And that is both for my pre-IB and my regular kids. The moment the math came in, which is just a basic algebra, I already lost my kids. So the question is, how will I help them? So that's the part that I'm developing in me, the skills in how will I be able to make them comfortable with math so that they can understand better the concept. Because in my case, when I attended that STEP program at UH, I understand more the equation when I understood the concept, because they were explaining during the brief after we do the hands-on is explaining the concept, tie it to the equation that we are seeing. And that's the part that I develop really well. And then, that's why. And to my students, I'm developing that. Some of them now can actually explain, like in my IB kids, the third year physics students that I have, they can now explain comfortably concept because they have understood the relationship of the variables. And now they can defend their own answer. And now they said that they're prepared for college.
Thanks. We'll do one last question. Caitlin Knapp asks, with the diverse context from which students enter your classroom, how do you create an equitable learning environment in your class?
Thank you for that question, Caitlin. I modify my lesson. I provided accommodation to them. And I know the diversity you're talking about there, especially in regular kids. That's a lot of diversity in there, because you will have ESL and you also have some good students there who are supposed to be in a more advanced class but prefer to be in that class. So what I would do is I would I would ask those higher or more advanced kids in that regular class to assist their classmates, especially if they're having hard times grasping information. Or at times I will ask my student, okay, explain your work to your classmates. So because sometimes students are better than us when explaining to our students, because they can talk to their peers to their level. So I would utilize those kids that are getting the lesson really, really quick to explain it to the whole class, so that there will be, so that we can reach out to those who are still struggling. And at times also, I have to modify the assignment. Like I would only require at least do this, especially if you have a SPED student. How will you do that? Okay, or in at least do the minimum in my class. But for that student to be able to do that, okay, it's already really something for me already.
Thank you. There appears to be one more question that has spurred some discussion. I don't know if you have time to address that, Dr. Chung.
Let's do, because the next session will start in 5 minutes. Please continue all the questions on Slack, as it allows asynchronous interactions. And we will do one breakout session Zoom for a participant to interact. And Caitlin can stand by. Margie, would you like to set us to the breakout rooms, please? Oh, by the way, thank all of the speakers for this session. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll come back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Celestina. That's wonderful.
Margie, I was in a room of one. Can you send me to a different room?
Hey, Caitlin,
Hi.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So, in response to something that Bernita asked you, you said that you're trying something new in freshman chemistry?
Yeah, so specifically this semester, I'm co-instructing our general chemistry lab course. So the way that Rice has broken this up is that this semester, it's going to be focused on the concepts that students would be learning in lab. And next semester, in the second half of the course, they'll be actually focusing on the in-lab methodology experiment. And so for this course, we decided, because they have, basically we give small lectures and then they work problem sets in class, and then there's outside work, of course, and then they do have one in-person lab for the semester. We decided to pitch the whole semester as working in teams. And it's actually working well.
Sorry to interrupt you, okay? I like to put on schedule so we can end on time.
Margaret is tough.
Sorry to interrupt you, Dave. You can continue on Slack, and I love Slack. It's like text. So
stop beating up on my people, Margaret.
Welcome back. And then now I'm going to hand the microphone to Caitlin Knapp. She's an IPOL student from Rice. And here you are, Caitlin.
Yes. So in this section, which is on the Alliance with undergraduate educators on improving climates for people of color, we are going to be starting off with a talk from Dr. Vernita Gordon. She is an associate professor of physics at the Center for Nonlinear Dynamics at the University of Texas in Austin. And Dr. Gordon's research as an experimental biological physicist focuses on the role of physics and spatial structure in developmental and evolutionary systems. Dr. Gordon's lab is investigating how cells interact with each other and with their environment, and how these interactions give rise to the development of disease-causing biofilms and their resistance to antibiotics in the immune system. So exciting real-world application stuff. She graduated with her Bachelor's of Science from Vanderbilt as magna cum laude, doubling in both physics and mathematics. She received her PhD in soft matter physics from Harvard University in 2003, followed by postdocs at the University of Edinburgh and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. In 2013, she received the Robert S. Heyer Research Award from the Texas section of the American Physical Society. And this year, she was the recipient of the 2020 President's Associate Teaching Excellence Award at UT. Recently, Dr. Gordon and her team have spent time developing a lesson plan in physics and biology that's been piloted to middle school students last summer at the UTeach STEM Prep Camp. And with that, I think we should all be excited to hear what Dr. Gordon has to present.
Hi, I'm Bernita Gordon. I am a professor, or an associate professor of physics at the University of Texas at Austin. I got asked by Margaret to say what I've done to improve the environment in the physics department at UT for people of color. And I wrote back and I said, I haven't really done anything to improve anything for anybody yet. So this is a new project that's only just recently started, and I think it's mostly not done yet. And the parts that I have done, I don't think we know enough yet to know whether or not they're working. And Margaret said that was okay, so that's what I'm going to tell you about. So this is what the UT Austin physics faculty look like. I went to our departmental website and I pulled all the pictures of everybody in the department off the page and I put them here on this slide. And what you can see is that the department is reflective of physics demographics overall. It is very male and it's very white. There are a few exceptions to both of those statements, but it is dominantly a white male department. This is not a giant surprise. And this lack of diversity is a national problem as well as a local problem. This isn't specific to UT Austin, that this is what physicists look like to people. I think you all know the physics has a diversity problem. These are some data from the American Physical Society looking at the percentage of bachelor's degrees earned by women, by African Americans, and by Hispanic Americans in different fields. And what you see is that physics lags at the bottom for all of these. And I'm focusing on bachelor's degree here because it's the undergraduate experience that I want to talk about. So this is a problem at the national level. At UT Austin, we've recently identified some specific local problems, and I want to say these problems probably exist in places that aren't the UT Austin Physics Department, but the local problem is what I have data for, and it's also what I can try to think about dealing with. So what we are seeing at UT Austin is that physics undergraduates are more likely to drop out of the physics major than are men. These are charts showing for women physics majors and men physics majors, the percent of students remaining in the major after each year of college in brown, and the percent of students who have left the physics major to do something else in other colors. And what we see is that consistently both women and men leave the physics major, but women leave the physics major more than men do. And this happens very early in their college careers. After 1 year of college, 77% of the original men physics majors are still in the physics major, but only 44% of the women are still in the physics major. After 2 years of college, 55% of the original men physics majors are still in the major, but only 30% of the women are in the physics major. These are the data for the cohort of students that entered UT Austin as declared physics majors in fall of 2012. These are data for the cohort of students who entered UT Austin as declared physics majors in fall of 2013, and you see a similar pattern of more dropouts happening for women than for men and happening very early on. These are data from 2014, where you see a similar pattern. These are data from the cohort entering in fall 2015, where again, you see a similar pattern. So we were just concerned about this. We were concerned as a department and we were concerned as a college about what's going on such that so many of our women undergraduates are leaving the physics major so early. And the answer is it's not the academic coursework. The women are not having to withdraw for academic reasons. They're not being dismissed for academic reasons. The academics is not what's pushing women out of the physics major, from what we can tell. So we did a lot of departmental soul searching, and we did focus group interview. I didn't do this, but other people in the department did some focus group interviews with women physics majors, either currently in our department or who had recently graduated, to find out, why are people leaving? Why don't you want to stay in this major? And I should also clarify this high dropout rate of women from physics, it's not reflected in other science departments at UT Austin. So what we found in our department in talking with these students were some really upsetting stories of women having really negative interpersonal interactions, primarily with other undergraduates in the department in environments where faculty were not present. And there were a lot of different incidents that I think could be summed up with jerks, and these are like other undergraduate jerks, doing or saying jerky things that made women feel bad or like they didn't belong or like they were alienated. And also cases that seemed to me like well-intentioned people who were nevertheless doing and saying things that made women feel bad and like they didn't belong. And so women were effectively being pushed out of the physics major because of the undergraduate environment. And by undergraduate environment, I mean primarily the environment that they experienced with other undergraduates, not as much in the classroom or in other settings where faculty or graduate students were present. And I don't want to paint a falsely rosy picture. There were some people who had negative experiences with faculty or with graduate students, but that didn't seem to be nearly as widespread. That didn't seem to be the dominant problem. These are problems in our specific departmental culture, these different incidents and bad experiences that women undergraduates have experienced. But also there's some things we know about women in physics and similar majors in general. One is that women tend to judge themselves more harshly than do men. So if you have women in a class and men in a class and they're doing the same in the class, the men will tend to think they're doing really well and the women will tend to think they're doing really poorly, even if their objective academic performance is the same. And if you judge yourself more harshly, if you think you're not doing well, if you think you're not good at something, you're going to be more likely to want to leave that major and that field. There's also a lack of positive role models for women because there just aren't as many women physicists as there are male physicists. And research has shown that women want to do something that matters for society. And a lot of times, the way physics is presented in the undergraduate curriculum, it's less clear, excuse me, it's less clear what the societal benefit would be. And so there's been studies that show that women tend to leave physics to go into areas where they can see a societal benefit. So I've been talking about women so far, and that's because that's the group that I have data for to show that there is a problem in our department. I do not for a minute think that an environment that is harmful and even toxic sometimes for women undergraduate is not going to be a problem for other groups. I'm really confident that people who do and say jerky things that make women feel bad are going to do and say jerky things that make underrepresented minorities or first-generation students or other students from underrepresented populations feel bad. And I also think that well-intentioned people who do and say things that are harmful to women out of obliviousness or cluelessness or just, you know, being 18, I'm sure they also do and say things that are harmful for these other groups of students. I just don't have data from UT Austin to show that because we haven't been able to get that from our it's called the Texas Institute for Discovery, Education, and Science that does this analysis. We haven't been able to get that yet, but it's something we're working on. So I want to do things to improve the environment for women, but I'm also really concerned that this is kind of the tip of the iceberg and there's a larger problem for these other groups of students. And I want to do things that will improve the environment for these students as well. So I was really upset when we started hearing about the things that these students were experiencing. And what I could think of that I could do is I felt like I could teach a seminar class to try to help people develop some community with each other and some kind of cognitive and emotional skills to reframe some of the difficulty of being in physics and maybe present them with some other ideas about what it means to be a physicist. So last spring, Elaine Lee and I taught, Elaine Lee is another professor in physics at UT Austin. We taught a seminar class. This seminar class has been around for a long time, but we kind of took it and we repurposed it to think about these kind of softer issues that are really important for success in the physics department. And we had a really hard time recruiting students to enroll in this class. So this is the first poster we made. And this is the second poster we made, trying to pump up what was going to be important and what you were going to learn about this class. And then finally, we got the department to agree to pay for free pizza and cookies at the first class day so that people would show up out of their desire for pizza and cookies. We could introduce the class for them and maybe they would stay and take the course. So we taught this class in spring of 2020. I had started off wanting to wanting to address these cognitive and emotional issues and help people kind of learn skills for handling difficult situations. What we learned from the students is that they really wanted to talk about careers, and specifically what could they do with a physics degree if they didn't want to go to graduate school. So we kind of tried to combine what I had wanted to do with this class to improve the climate within the department and the experience of undergraduates within our department with our students' strong interest in talking about careers. So this is the schedule of what we did. This class met once a week in the spring. We started off with, we had some discussions on how to respond to difficult situations and what skills you can develop to develop resilience and persistence in a difficult major like physics. We talked about things that are important for succeeding at UT Austin, like being intentional and making a plan about your undergraduate career. We got advice from upper class physics majors. Then we had a lot of discussions on careers concerns, because I felt like for our students to take on board these cognitive and emotional skills that I thought were really important, I also wanted to give them what they seemed to be looking for, which was largely, what do I do with a career? In addition to those in-class experiences, we gave students out-of-class assignments, which were primarily very short writing assignments, like write a short paragraph and turn it in. And they were just judged based on completion. I didn't try to evaluate this or grade the writing or anything like that, but I did try to write every student a short note to respond to what they had written in their weekly paper. So some of these weekly papers, especially the ones early on, were intended to help us shape the course, to kind of meet the students where they were and address the needs they felt. And in the case of the last assignment, it was intended to help us know how to do a better job on the future offerings of this course. We also forced the students to go talk with a faculty member about undergraduate research, because there's all kinds of research that shows that being involved in undergraduate research is really important for staying in physics and for having a better experience in physics. And we wanted to kind of force students to start thinking about that as early as possible. We did quite a few out-of-class writing assignments where students had to think about and respond to different presentations on cognitive and emotional skills to help them start thinking about what they could do to respond to difficult situations, or to respond to situations where they were struggling, or to respond to situations where they saw someone else struggling. And finally, we had fewer reflections in writing on careers, but we did give students some opportunities to think about what they wanted in a career, what they wanted their career to look like, and then how they could start to go about shaping that for themselves. So then I applied for something called a Provost Teaching Fellowship. And the Provost Teaching Fellowship is something that UT Austin offers to basically try an innovation or try a revamping of some part of education at UT Austin. And I got this Provost Teaching Fellowship. So this is expanded into a larger project. And the Provost Teaching Fellowship officially started this semester. And this is what I'm doing. I have set up mentoring groups for new physics majors, either entering freshmen or transfer students, who come from underrepresented groups, meaning they're either women, or they're underrepresented minorities, or they're first generation, or they're more than one of those categories. In principle, I would like to offer mentoring groups to all new physics majors. In reality, it's too many people, and I couldn't see how to take that on. But I would not be at all unhappy if in the future we could somehow expand this and be broad across the department. So I got a list of all the students who fell into these underrepresented demographics, and I emailed them a couple of times, and I asked them if they would like to participate in a mentoring group. And I contacted potential mentors, either students who had taken the seminar class last semester and had shown real engagement with these different cognitive and emotional issues. So I felt like they would be in a good place to talk with students about how to handle different types of difficulties. And I also had a few mentors who hadn't been in the seminar class, but who had been really involved in mentoring and leadership with different types of other science and engineering groups on campus. And the students who indicated an interest in being placed in mentoring groups have been assigned to a student mentor. I tried to match the student mentor to the new students such that they could act as a role model. So new women majors or have women role models. Hispanic new physics majors have Hispanic mentors. And I did my best to do what I could with first generation students to match them with a corresponding mentor. So I've been giving mentors guidance and what types of things to talk about with their mentees. And I've also been trying to encourage mentees to think about what they want to get out of this experience so that they can be more intentional about making that happen. They have been meeting with each other weekly. I'm going to meet with them monthly. We've already had our first monthly large group meeting over Zoom. The second thing that I've done is I've hosted Professor David Yeager, who's a nationally recognized expert on mindset, to come and talk with the physics department about the importance of mindset for success in STEM, how this is especially important for underrepresented groups and what we can do to help with this. And he's going to return in the future to talk about more specific concrete actions we can take. And later this semester, we're going to set up a student panel for current undergraduates to discuss their experiences in the department with faculty. Next semester, I'm going to teach the same Physics 110C course with a draft ethics framework. So I have to explain what this ethics framework is. UT Austin has this set of graduation requirements called flags. And they're specific to UT Austin because they wanted to have total control over them so that the Board of Regents can control them. One of the flags that all undergraduates have to have is an ethics flagged course, and they have to have that as a graduation requirement. We don't have any ethics flagged course in the physics department. So one of the ways that I think we could get more students to buy into the importance of what we're teaching in this class and to take it seriously and try to implement it is to give it this ethics flag, because that's a graduation requirement. So I'm going to work on how to revise this and to teach it in such a way that it meets the ethics standards. And after I've done that draft teaching, I'm going to finalize that revision and then apply to the university to be recognized as an ethics flagged course and teach it that way so that students can count that toward their graduation requirement. We're going to do some surveys to learn about the undergraduate experience in the department to get a better and an ongoing idea of what needs improvement. And we're going to continue doing mentoring groups for new physics majors and workshops for students and faculty to improve the environment. The way we're going to know if this is working is we're going to measure the rate of the dropout from the physics major and see if this gets better, and specifically, does it get better for women and other underrepresented groups. And we're going to do student surveys and focus groups discussions to find out what their experience of the physics department is like and see if this changes over time with these different interventions we're trying to put into place. So thank you to the Provost Office at UT Austin for the Provost Teaching Fellowship. Oh, hey, I misspelled teaching. Well, that's embarrassing, but hey. Thank you to you for listening and inviting me to give this talk. Thank you to Elaine Lee for teaching the seminar with me last semester, and to all the different guest speakers we had come in. Thank you to the people who helped me shape my course schedule and the other parts of my PTF application, and to the Provost Office for funding and the Physics Department for money for pizza and cookies. And that's it. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to talk about them.
All right, let's all thank Dr. Gordon for a great talk. And if you could please write your questions in the chat, and if you're a student, please mark that in your question. So I think while we give people a chance to get their questions together, I will go back, and I believe I see one from Dr. Tim Bylash, and he asked, Dr. Gordon, how important is the social experiences relative to gender and ethnicity in avoiding physics? Don't get the personal emotional rewards of a mostly male-dominated environment, and is it bridgeable? Do we need some more personal support because of lack of feedback or role models?
Would you mind rephrasing the question, because I'm not sure that I understood it correctly?
Yes. So, and I'll assume Dr. Balash can correct me if I'm interpreting this wrong, but he asks, how important is the social, or it seems like he's asking how important are social experiences relative to gender and ethnicity in avoiding physics? I'm guessing as a major or in coursework. And is this bridgeable? Do we need more personal support because of lack of feedback and role models?
So I don't think you can disentangle social experiences from gender and ethnicity, because who we think we are and who we think other people are in terms of their gender and ethnicity is shaped by our social experiences. This is all a big thing. And if we lived in another society, we might not have all the baggage that comes with gender. We might have some different type of baggage that doesn't really play out in this society. So I don't know how to separate those. I do think, and I don't have hard data for this is just my intuition, that if you're kind of behind the 8 ball in terms of what you and the people around you think of your ability to do physics because of your gender, ethnicity, or whatever, then it makes perfect sense that you would need extra support and extra mentoring to kind of put yourself on a level playing field with people who are kind of traditional STEM majors and nobody thought that they couldn't do that.
Okay, and Aravind Chandrasekaran asks, will an exit interview from folks who drop out help gain insights on what you need to improve on?
Yes, I think it would. I will be honest, between the pandemic and everything else, I am extremely, I'm very daunted right now. But yes, in principle, I think that would be a really good idea. We weren't thinking of doing an exit interview per se, but we were thinking of doing like a survey of current students at different stages in the program to see what their experience was like and what they felt like they needed.
Then let's see.
Sorry.
Pernilla Vitung asks, she says, great initiative. So she's wondering how many students took the course, and was it only females or was it open to everyone?
So it was open to everyone, and we wound up having a few non-physics majors in there because they were interested, and because I felt like I was very concerned that the enrollment was so low, we wouldn't be able to get a good discussion dynamic. You don't want so many people that people feel lost in the crowd, but you also don't want so few that they feel always on the spot. You need like a comfortable group size for people to kind of find people they're comfortable talking to. So it was women and men. It was predominantly men, because that's what the demographics of our physics department look like. It was also intended originally to be focused toward new physics majors, like freshman majors. And because we had such a hard time getting enrollment, we kind of opened it up and encouraged people at all stages of their physics career to be in it. So I don't think we had any seniors, but we did have a couple of juniors. Which was actually, I thought, I didn't intend it that way, but I thought it kind of turned out nice because they had been around for a while. And so they could say, oh, well, I've seen what we do and I've seen what this other department does. And this is where we could learn from what they're doing better. And that was really good to get that older student perspective in there.
Diana Valverde Mendez asks, I was wondering if you could give more advice for grad students who are mentoring undergrad women in physics and who are mentoring first-year grad students.
So this is really broad advice, and if you want to email me about this, we can talk about it more in general. I would say encourage the students to think about what they want from the mentoring relationship and to ask for it, to initiate that. but also think about what you as a mentor think would be important, and see if you can find a way to offer that in a way that's not threatening, but puts it out there, even if the students either don't think to ask for it or maybe feel uncomfortable. So if you're talking about issues of like mental health, for example, students may or may not feel comfortable saying, I'm taking all my classes on Zoom, I'm really isolated and I'm really depressed. But as a mentor, you could say, you know what, this is a really hard semester and most people I know are struggling with mental health in some way. This is what I do. Hey, do any of you have these problems and how do you deal with it? I think taking that kind of initiative on somewhat risky topics can help make it feel safe for students to open up. And I think also showing some of your own vulnerabilities, showing where things are difficult for you, I think can help make mentees more comfortable acknowledging that they're having difficulty somewhere.
That's good advice. Jennifer Curtis asked, did unexpected themes, conversations, or insights arise because it was dominated by male physics majors, and yet in some sense your target was women and underrepresented minorities?
So we really lucked out there because one of the male, he was a junior, one of the male physics majors who was enrolled in the class was really involved with the Astronomy Student Society and the Society of Physics Students, and really cared about all kinds of equity issues and things to make the undergraduate environment better. And he had put a lot of thought into this, and he had even done different things in his extracurricular activities to address that. So in that sense, I feel like I learned a lot from him, just learning about what he and his different student orgs were doing and how he saw the physics department. That was really helpful to me, even though he wasn't, he was a white male, like he wasn't a part of our target audience. And also he was a junior, like he was past the stage where we were going to prevent him from dropping out of the major. But that, I think, worked out really well. I didn't feel that anyone dominated the conversation. I felt that people in the class were very thoughtful and very respectful of each other. There were people who just didn't talk very much, but my sense was that they just didn't want to talk. And from their written papers that I read every week, they still seemed like they were very engaged and responsive to what was going on. They just didn't want to be so verbally.
Okay, so going along with that, M. Waxham chatted, I'm interested to know what you envision doing about shaping the environment with regard to the quote unquote jerks.
Dude, if I knew how to do that, I would have done it already. Like I kind of went into this saying I have no idea how to teach people not to be jerks, but maybe I can teach people how to deal with jerks. Like I totally agree that someone ought to teach people how not to be jerks, but I do not have the foggiest clue how to do that. I also think that most of us have been jerks at some point in our lives without realizing it. Like we're not jerky people, but we've done or said jerky things. And maybe I can't reach someone who's totally a jerk, but maybe I can reach someone who does or says the occasional jerky thing by helping them realize what they're doing or saying. But your question, dude, I don't know how to do that. If you figure out how to do that, could you please let me know? That'd be awesome. Also, you should write that up and publish it.
All right, and just one more question. This is from student Landry Horimbere. How important is role model matching to the mentoring relationship? And what can be done if that's not possible, especially for students of color?
So the answer is I don't know. I felt like since a lack of role models, like different published studies have shown that a lack of role models is a problem for people persisting in physics and other STEM areas. I was trying to match them with role models. Also, I felt like, well, if the women do experience some gender issues, they're probably going to feel more comfortable raising those with a woman mentor than with a man mentor. But I don't really know how important it is. I haven't measured this. And you're right that it can be difficult with students of color. Now, we have a fairly large Hispanic student population at UT Austin. So it wasn't any problem for me to match new Hispanic physics majors with more senior Hispanic physics majors. That was fine. If we had had a new African-American student who wanted to be mentored, it would have been a struggle to find an African-American mentor for that person. We didn't have any who wanted to be mentored, which is a whole other set of problems. And yeah, so I don't really know the answer to that. I also have just made a point of trying to stay in touch with the mentors and mentees regularly and giving suggestions for how they can talk to each other. And the ones who've responded seem to feel it's working well. There are a lot of students who aren't responding, and that I don't know how to deal with. It's a really hard semester to figure out how to try to reach people if they're not answering their email.
I think that's a struggle every teacher probably faces. So I think we got a little bit of time. Let's see, Sheila asks, how many people turned down the opportunity for mentoring?
So only 1 or 2 people actually turned down, said, no, thank you, I'm not interested. And I just wrote back and said, thank you for letting me know. The vast majority of the students just didn't respond to the emails that I sent. So I sent several emails. I sent either 2 or 3 to everyone who was on this list of women or underrepresented or first-gen students. The vast majority of them never answered. I don't consider that active turning down, because I don't know about at your institutions, but at mine, when I teach, there's always a lot of students who just won't respond to email and who apparently don't get their emails. And if we're on campus in person, I can try to catch them in the classroom. But with everything online because of COVID, I just have no idea how to reach them.
Can I ask one last question, please?
Yeah.
Is there a difference between women in experimental versus theoretical physics? Because in my school, there was a huge difference in the women in experimental physics versus theoretical.
What do you mean, like difference in the numbers of women in theory versus experiment, or how do you mean?
Numbers.
Ooh, I haven't seen any data on this. If there is a difference, I haven't picked up on it anecdotally. I do see a big difference between different fields of physics, and that's borne out by APS data, but I don't know of experiment versus theory splits.
Okay, and with that, obviously, I think there's been a lot of interest in this talk. So I encourage everyone who's interested to continue that over on the Slack channel. And let's thank Dr. Gordon once again for an excellent presentation. And our next speaker is going to be Dr. Sandra Yancey McGuire. And hopefully that will be coming up on the screen shortly. So I'll just go ahead and say that Dr. McGuire is the Director Emerita of the Center for Academic Success, Professor Emerita in the Department of Chemistry, and retired Assistant Vice Chancellor at Louisiana State University. She has delivered keynote addresses or presented workshops at over 400 institutions in 47 states and 11 countries. Prior to joining LSU, she spent 11 years at Cornell University, where she received the coveted Clark Distinguished Teaching Award. Her best-selling book, Teach Students How to Learn, was published by Stylus in 2015, and the student version of the book, Teach Yourself How to Learn, was released in 2018. McGuire's most recent accolades include the 2019 Commitment to Excellence in Academic Support Award from the Commission for Academic Support in Higher Education, the 2017 American Chemical Society Award for encouraging disadvantaged students to pursue careers in chemical sciences, and induction in 2017 into the LSU College of Science Hall of Distinction. She is an elected fellow of the American Chemical Society and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and she received the Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Mathematics, and Engineering Mentoring in a White House Oval Office ceremony. Dr. McGuire received her bachelor's degree, magna cum laude, from Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. her master's degree from Cornell University, and her PhD from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, where she received the Chancellor's Citation for Exceptional Professional Promise. She is married to Dr. Stephen C. McGuire, the James and Ruth Smith Professor of Physics Emeritus at Southern University. They are the parents of Dr. Carla McGuire Davis and Dr. Stephanie McGuire, and the doting grandparents of Joshua, Ruth, Daniel, and Joseph Davis. And with that, let us welcome Dr. McGuire.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this session on metacognition, the key to retaining diverse undergraduate students in STEM. I'm really happy that you're joining us for this session so that I can talk about something that I've been passionate about for about the past 20 years or so, and that is teaching students metacognitive learning strategies to increase success. So as an agenda, our brief time together, we're going to define metacognition. We'll see some examples demonstrating the impact, and then I'll teach you some very specific strategies. We'll talk about Bloom's taxonomy and the study cycle. Then we'll end by looking at the impact on academic success at students at different levels. So let's define metacognition. It's just a term that was coined by cognitive psychologist Abel back in 1976. Simply put, it's your ability to think about your own thinking. The way I explain it to students is, it's as if you have a brain outside your brain looking at what your brain is doing. And that big brain is asking your brain questions. And it's saying, did she understand this information? Did she just memorize it last night because the test is today? It's your ability to be consciously aware that you are a problem solver. So when things come up or you have questions, you don't have to wait for somebody else to answer your questions. You can actually take steps to start solving your own problems. It's your ability to plan, monitor, and control your mental processing so you know if you're understanding something or if you're just memorizing it. It's your ability to accurately judge your level of learning. So you know that if you're just memorizing information that you really need to understand and be able to apply, you can adjust the level of your studying to get the appropriate level. It's your ability to know what you know and what you don't know, so that you don't show up at a test or a quiz thinking, okay, I'm good, I've studied, I know all this stuff. Then you get there and you look at the first 3 questions and realize, oh, I guess I don't really know this information. Well, why is it that so many students haven't developed these metacognitive skills? Well, for many students, it wasn't necessary before. These are results from the UCLA Higher Education Research Institution. Every year they survey lots of first-year students, all kinds of different institutions, 2-year, 4-year, etc. And they ask a lot of questions, but I'm particularly interested in answers to 2. One is how much time students spent doing any homework at all in 12th grade. The other is the average that they had when they graduated from high school. What you'll notice is that the percent who spent a minimum of 6 hours a week never got over 45%, a high of about 45% in 2015. But you'll notice that if we look at the percent who graduated from high school with an A average, that number crossed 50% in 2013, and it is almost 58% now. And so what that means is that we as faculty will have to help students make that transition, help them close the gap between the current behaviors that they bring to our courses, which leads in lower level learning that doesn't get them the grades that they are hoping for, and the productive behavior that is going to lead to the desired level of learning and the grades that they are seeking. And so I want to show you exactly how I get students to change from the attitude about what they think is going to be successful and what really is successful. And I like to do that by asking reflection questions, because I find that when we ask students reflection questions and have them think about what their experience has been, what their ideas are, and then come up with answers to those questions, they will be giving us the information that we would be telling them if we weren't using reflection questions. But I find that when they give us the information, it's much more likely it's going to change their behavior. So the first question is, what's the difference, if any, between studying and learning? And I find that very few students have thought about this. Almost nobody has, but they think about it very seriously. They'll come up with things like, they'll say, studying is just memorizing information for a test or a quiz, whereas learning is when I understand that information, I can apply it, I can relate it to what I already know. Sometimes they'll say studying is short term, learning is long term. And I said, absolutely. Then I'll ask them, given that difference, up to this point in your academic career, would you say you've been more in study mode or learn mode? And of course, they say study mode. Then the next reflection question I like to ask is giving them two tasks and ask for which they would work harder. First task, I say, you know you have to make an A on an upcoming test. Let's say it's the second task, and the instructor has said, you know, you failed the first test, and so you have to make an A on this test, or you're not going to do well in this course. So you know how hard you would work for that. As opposed to the second scenario, the professor says, no, I've decided that before the second test, I'm going to offer a review session for the class, and I want you to teach that review session. So I'm going to have you come up to the front of the class, and you're going to go over all the important concepts, paying particular attention to the more difficult concepts to make sure everybody's prepared for the test the next day. Would you work harder for A or B? And yes, you've guessed it, most students say they would work harder for B. When I ask them why, they'll say things like, oh, I got to really know it if I have to teach it. Sometimes they'll say, I don't want to look stupid in front of the class. And sometimes they say, well, now everybody's grade is dependent upon what I do. So I want to make sure I can explain it more than one way. I can use charts, diagrams, etc. And so then when I ask, at this point in time, you've been more in scenario A mode or scenario B mode, then of course they all say scenario A mode. And I say, that's great. I love it when you're doing all the wrong things, because that means that when you start changing things, you're much more likely to see a big impact. And one student at LSU heard about this, and he had a beta fish in his room, and he said that he was going to try teaching the material to his beta fish, and he did. And about a month or so after the first presentation, he emailed me and he sent me the grades to show me the impact. In biology, he went from a 66 to a 98, chemistry from a 62 to an 83, ending with B's in both courses when he had started with D or very low D. And I always ask students to email me and tell me exactly what they changed, what they were doing differently. And so Ty sent the email and he started attending more of the supplemental instruction sessions. These are just peer-led team review sessions. And he also went to more of the exam reviews. And prior to this discussion, he would just go to the sessions and not having prepared for them, just to see what was going to be covered. Now he started preparing for them. And he said that after those sessions, he'd go to his room and teach the information to his beta fish, and anything he couldn't explain, he'd study more, and he continued that cycle until he could explain everything in his notes. And you saw the impact that it had. And I want to share with you the experience of Dina, who was a first-year physics student at LSU. And I actually met her when she was about to drop out of the physics major after she'd made the 54. She was a straight A student from Houston. And so she was alarmed when she saw the 80 with the 54. She said, I'm out of physics. But I had one session with her, and she ended up making an A in the course, 4.0 that semester, and she graduated from LSU with a 3.8 GPA in physics. And her problem was, like many of our students, she was just memorizing formulas and doing her homework by using the online homework, the strategies that are presented there, or even using the examples in the book. And I find that that's what many, many students are doing. In fact, it was when I taught at Cornell University that I realized that the number one reason that most of my students, my chemistry students, were getting B's or lower on tests, and they could have been making A's and B's, was because they were using the examples as a guide to do their homework without actually working it themselves. And so the strategy that I like to share with students for doing homework is, first you've got to study the material before you look at the first problem. And when you come across examples, then instead of skipping it, as most students are doing, I'm finding, is you just read the problem statement and work it yourself until you get to an answer. Compare your answer with the answer in the book. If you got the same answer, then you can look at what the author did. But if you didn't, don't look yet, try to figure out where your mistake was. And after you figured out where your mistake was, then you can redo it. Now that you've worked the example that way, ready for the homework. And then when you do the homework, then treat it as if it's a test or a quiz. Try to do 2 or 3 problems, answer 2 or 3 questions, and speed it up so that you're actually putting yourself in the situation that might be the case when you're actually taking the test. And this is Dana. She is now a practicing medical physicist in the Fort Worth area, and she is a happy camper. So now what I want to do is have you go through a little activity that will show you why I am so confident that students can see immediate and dramatic improvements in their academic performance using these strategies. And so this little exercise involves you're finding numbers out of a series of numbers. And so on the next slide, there are going to be a whole bunch of numbers, and I'm going to give you 15 seconds. I first find the number 1, then find numbers in sequence. And we'll see how you do. So find the numbers now. And that's 15 seconds. So if you're like most people, you found maybe up to 6 or 7, or maybe even as high as 11 or so. And that's the number you found. But let's look at, if we look at the same jumble of numbers, we have a vertical line and a horizontal line, and we identify where the number 1 is. And I'm going to ask you, what do you notice about the arrangement of the other numbers in the diagram? Absolutely, yes. Students pick this up really quickly. They'll say, they're arranged in clockwise fashion, or sometimes students will say in quadrants. And we see that's the case, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, etc. And so now what I'm going to do is give you 15 seconds to find as many numbers as you can find, and we'll see how far you get this time. So let's start finding the numbers now. Stop. Okay, and if you're like most people, you probably got about twice as many this time as before. Some people get even more than twice as many. And so I tell students, absolutely, that's proof positive that you could have gotten a 45 on the first test and 90 on the next test because something was different. And when I ask, what was the major difference? They immediately get it, and they'll say, we knew how the information was organized. And I said, absolutely. And so that's the key for your courses. Instead of memorizing individual bits and pieces of information without seeing what the overall structure is or how things fit together, then that's not going to work so well. So the goal is to look at, how is the information in chapter 5 related to what I learned in chapter 1? So you have to really know how the information is organized and really pay attention to that. That makes a big difference in most students, the way they approach the course and the amount that they get out of the course. And a lot of the information that we're talking about now, and I tell students, it comes from cognitive science literature. We know a lot about learning now that we did not know before. We know that active learning is much more lasting than passive learning. We know that thinking about thinking is very important. Teaching students about this, even teaching them the word metacognition. We know that the level at which learning occurs is extremely important. That's where Bloom's taxonomy comes in. It's the hierarchy of learning levels that was developed by a group of cognitive scientists, Benjamin Bloom and colleagues at the University of Chicago back in 1957. And it shows that remembering straight memorization is the base, lowest level. Then up from that is understanding, where you can explain things in your own words. Here at applying, you can work problems you've never seen before, answer questions you've never seen before. At analyzing, you could take any topic, break it into simpler concepts and see how they all fit together. If you're evaluating, you could look at any two theories, any two ideas of how to do a problem, ideas about how to synthesize things and know whether one is more likely to be correct than another. If you're at creating, you can come up with your own ideas, your own theories, your own ways of doing things. And I find that when we teach students about Bloom's taxonomy, and most of them have never heard of Bloom's taxonomy, but we teach them Bloom's taxonomy, they get it. When I ask students, after they've learned Bloom's, at what level did you have to operate to make A's or B's in high school? Typically, it will be around 1 or 2. Now, some students are higher. If they've taken lots of AP courses or IB, they'll be higher. Most are 1 or 2. Then I ask them, now that you're in college and you see what we do here, what's the lowest level you have to operate? And typically they will say, analyze, evaluating, or creating. So they recognize that they were operating at lower levels before, and they've got to move to higher levels now. So that's the third piece of the puzzle. The reason they're not doing well is not because they're not as smart as they ever were, but they were in study mode and not learn mode. They were studying to make A's on tests instead of preparing to teach the information. And now we see that they were operating at lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And so we teach them how to move to higher levels, something that we call the study cycle that was developed by the Center for Academic Success at LSU. And it's just a 5-stage process, 5 steps. Preview information before you go to class so your brain has that picture of what's going to be covered. Then go to class, and if you've done the preview effectively, you can be actively engaged in the class session. And then as soon after class as possible, review what just happened in class. And this step is necessary because you've got to start the information from going from short-term memory to long-term memory. Now, if you're efficient, the preview and review only take about 10 minutes, and so you've got to do more than that. And so we show them how to do what we call focused study sessions. Take a minute or so to set a goal for what you want to accomplish, and then study with focus and action for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes. And then at the end of that period, then take a break, because even though you might not think your brain is tired, it's getting less efficient. So take a break, reward yourself, and then come back and review what you've just studied. And we tell students, if you can do 2 or 3 of these during daylight hours, another 1 or 2 at night, you'll have studied for 4 to 5 hours that day. Most people don't study that much in a whole week. Then periodically assess your learning. See, are the strategies I'm using effective, or I need to do something else? And here's the impact. This is a young lady who's now a PhD candidate in Emory. And she said the focus study sessions really helped her the most. She had an A+ on 3 out of 4 of her finals. She said it's important to use it every day before finals, but it was really beneficial during finals week when she had so much to do, because it really is kind of a time management strategy also. And so now I just want to share with you the impact with different types of students. This is an email that I got from a student after I'd spoken at the Roanoke Valley Governor's School, a school for students who are very talented in STEM. And I spoke to the afternoon students at that school, and she had a physics test that was in 2 parts. And she took the first part before she heard the information. And then she went home that night and studied using the strategies, and a 90 on the second part. And she said she used the strategy of teaching and of self-confidence. She said, I went into the test thinking I would do well. I did. And this is just overnight. And this is an example of a physics class, an AP physics class that is in a totally minority school in a very low income area. And here you can see that the students, the average on the first exam was less than 67. And on exam 2, after Mr. Lorenzo Foster taught them the strategies, was almost 87. Then on the third exam, it was 95.6. When I saw all of these hundreds on the third exam, I said, Lorenzo, did you give them a bunch of bonus points? And he said, no, I just told them how to study, and they told me that they were studying differently. And so I actually asked him to send me pictures of the students, and he did. He took a picture after they got their scores back from the second test. And this picture is instructive because you can see how happy the students look. They look confident. After the first test, they all wanted to drop the course. They were seniors, and they thought that it was going to derail their possibilities for getting college scholarships, but didn't let them drop. And this is what happened on test 2. I told Lorenzo to tell them if they kept it up, I would give them a pizza party. And they did. And this is the pizza party I gave them. This is me, and this is Lorenzo. And they shared with me what they did differently. They were in study groups. They started explaining things. They started doing homework differently. And then the last exam is a graduate student who was failing all of his cumulative exams. At LSU, they have to pass 6 cumulative exams in their first 2 years, or they are not allowed to continue in the PhD program. And we give 8 a year. He had only passed 1 his whole first year, but he started learning these strategies, working with the Learning Center and the Writing Center. And the second year, he didn't even need all 8 exams. He passed 5 out of 7. And he passed the December exam with the highest score in the group. And this is he, Dr. Algernon Kelly. Take a good look at this guy. He's the only person I know on the planet who has a PhD in chemistry, but he started every course at the developmental level in college. And he started teaching at Xavier when he left LSU. He teaches in upstate New York now. He teaches these strategies everywhere he goes, and he gets lots of emails from grateful students. I just wanted to share this series of emails. This student wrote, "Hello, Dr. Kelly. I'm struggling at Xavier. I really want to succeed, but everything I've tried seems to end with just a decent grade." Then 1 week later, he goes, "Hello, Dr. Kelly. Made an 84 on my chemistry exam compared to 56 on my first." Then early the next month, "Hey, Dr. Kelly, I've increased my bio exam from 76 to 91.5, gained a sense of hope and confidence. My family and I are really grateful that you've taken the time to get me back on track." And you notice the change in his mood. It goes from, "Hello, Dr. Kelly. Hey, Dr. Kelly. Hey, Dr. Kelly." This is the good thing about this information also. It gives students confidence and a positive outlook. So in conclusion, we really can significantly increase student success. We've got to teach our students how to learn. We've got to emphasize that every student can excel regardless of whatever their prior experiences were. We can't judge their potential on their initial performance, and we can't let them do it either. We've got to encourage them to implement these metacognitive strategies and persist even in the face of initial failure. And this is the book for teachers that has the strategies that I'm talking about. And this is the book for students, Teach Yourself How to Learn. And these are some acknowledgments. These are some additional references. So thank you so much. And now we can open it up for comments and questions.
All right, so join me in thanking Dr. McGuire for that wonderful talk. And again, please put your questions into the chat. And if you're a student, please label your question as being from a student so we can make sure and get to those. So as we're waiting for questions to come in, I would just like to start off with a question that I have for Dr. McGuire. Obviously, you've gone around the world and all around the country teaching teachers how to incorporate this metacognition into their classrooms. And I was just wondering if you get more positive response or interest from faculty that are already using things like active learning techniques, as opposed to those who are more traditionally lecturers. And if you've noticed that these metacognitive skills that you can teach students can work in both cases.
That's a great question. And I actually get very positive responses from both groups because most faculty, they're teaching traditionally, and they're finding that they're not getting a lot of student response. When they teach them these strategies and students know they can take control of their own learning and there are things that they need to do to improve their learning, they do that. And teachers in an active learning situation, especially teachers who are in flipped classrooms, find that many times students don't do things before they come to class because they don't really know what to do. But when they share these strategies with them, especially the study cycle, students love that. And they say, this is great. Now I have a plan. Nobody ever taught me how to study before. I didn't know how to study because I never needed to. And so when they have those very specific strategies, then they tend to implement them. And they've worked from middle school through, I work with graduate school students, medical school students, law school students. at very different levels, because especially with the Bloom's taxonomy, most students haven't seen that. That really gives them an idea of what faculty are talking about when we say, well, this is graduate school. You got to kick it up a notch, kick it up a level. Well, if they don't know what the levels are, they have no clue about that. But when they see Bloom's taxonomy, that's really an eye-opening paradigm for them, paradigm shift.
Thank you. Madeline Galbraith says, thank you for your talk. Is there a difference in the amount of time needed to complete the homework / study before and after? If the homeworks are already time intensive, how should students implement this?
Right. Well, and when you look at, and I'm assuming it's before and after class time. Yes. And so before class, what we tell students to do is just do that preview. Look at the boldface print, the italicized words, any charts or graphs, get an overview of what's going to be covered in lecture. Because most students will not, I don't even want students to read try to read the chapter before they come. Because if I'm talking about, let's say, unimolecular nucleophilic substitution versus bimolecular nucleophilic substitution, you know that when they read about it, they're not going to understand it. They're going to think it's hard. And I've got to fight against those attitudes in lecture. But if they just get the unimolecular, bimolecular, you know, what is she going to say about this when she gets to class? That's a lot better. So the amount of time that they spend before class is only about 10-15 minutes to get that overview, to prepare themselves for using the information that they're hearing, being actively engaged in the lecture. And then after is when they do those focused study sessions where they're putting in more time. And we tell students, if you can do 2 or 3 of those sessions during daylight hours and another 1 or 2 at night, you'll have studied for 4 to 5 hours that day. And most students don't study that much, you know, in a whole week. So it's definitely putting in more effort after class than before.
Donna Stokes asks, where is the best place to teach these skills, i.e., in the classroom or through mentoring or in some other setting?
Okay, I'm going to say it's good to teach them in all of the above, but I think it's best to teach them in the classroom setting. And that's because that's where most of the students are going to be. You'll get to more students if you teach it in class than just in mentoring. But if it's followed up and reinforced in those other settings, that's great. The best time to teach it typically is after the students, especially students who are physics majors. You know, they are not going to be aware that they don't have the best strategies. And so it's usually not until after they get their first test back, our first quiz back, that they are ready to now recognize that, oh, I need some different strategies. Because just like Dana, who made hundreds when she was in high school in Houston, she'd always wanted to be a medical physicist. And when she got that 54, she was going to switch to being a business major. But when you give them the strategies at that point, you know, she didn't get it in class, she got it in my office. But if you can do it in class, then that I think will have the most impact.
Okay, one further question from Robin Nagy. Dr. McGuire, would you recommend showing this talk to students or go straight to the details like teaching them the study cycle?
Oh, no, that's a great question. I would say showing going through the information with the students. And actually in the book, Teach Students How to Learn, there are actually links to PowerPoint presentations that there's an outline of a presentation where you can actually put in your class information, deliver it to a class. And it's geared for about a 50-minute class session. And I think that it's important to give them kind of the whole package, because it really is the reflection questions that set the stage for students being willing to think that they need to try something different. Basically, they need to see the difference between what they were doing and what we're suggesting they do. They need to see the before and after scores. They need to hear the stories about what's happened with other students. So it really is the whole thing. If we just teach them the study cycle, some of them will do it, but not nearly as many. But I guess if I had to say maybe the 3 most impactful things, because I've heard from so many students now, one is using the strategy of pretending you're teaching the information, so that your brain will reveal to you what you really don't fully understand, and you can go back and study that. The other is doing the homework differently. And then the last thing is making sure that you do those the study cycles and spend some time on every subject every day. Because I find, especially with physics students who've always been very successful before, they are much more likely to develop imposter syndrome, to suffer from stereotype threat. And when we show them examples that, and that's what the little exercise was for, to show you that you could double your performance in 5 minutes. So it's not that you're not smart, it's just that you weren't using the right strategies.
All right, our final question is from Jose Anuchik. It says, different disciplines require different ways of learning. For example, some involve dissecting large amounts of information and others require to learn a new way of thinking like math and physics. Do we need different strategies for studying?
I'm going to say yes, and that's really a part of what metacognition is, where students are now analyzing how they think, but also what are the thinking/learning requirements for this particular course. If it's a course that has a lot of information that needs to be memorized, then if I use flashcards, if I do make myself practice quizzes, that might work for that. But if it's a course where I've got to operate at higher conceptual levels, then what do I need to do in order to make sure that I have the basic information so that I can see what that overall structure is, what the higher conceptual structure is? So absolutely, there are different strategies required for different types of courses, and metacognition really involves looking seriously at that and determining which strategies are going to be best for which courses.
All right, and with that, let's thank Dr. McGuire again. Any further questions, of course, can be sent through the Slack channel. And we will get ready for our next presentation by Dr. Sheila Jaswal. So Dr. Jaswal is an associate professor in the chemistry department and program in biophysics and biochemistry, and director of the Being Human in STEM, HSTEM initiative at Amherst College. With a team of undergraduate researchers, she studies the interplay between protein stability, dynamics, and function using a combined biophysical and computational approach. In spring 2016, she collaborated with students to develop the Being Human in STEM course model in response to a campus-wide protest calling for a more welcoming and inclusive learning living environment. In the course, students drive the academic inquiry, investigating both the local experience and the literature on inclusion in STEM, then design tools and interventions to enhance their own STEM community and sense of belonging. As the HSTEM director, she facilitates the HSTEM course in collaboration with students, staff, and faculty colleagues, organizes campus and regional HSTEM events, gives talks and workshops at colleges, universities, and conferences nationwide, oversees a growing HSTEM network, and collaborates with HSTEM affiliates at other institutions, and shares curricular and other HSTEM resources at www.beinghumanInSTEM.com. And with that, we look forward to hearing from Dr. Jaswal.
Hi, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you today about an ongoing experiment in partnering across faculty, staff, and students to enhance belonging and equity in our STEM community at Amherst. Like you, with the PoLS network, we have an HSTEM network, and so this HSTEM course model has been adopted at other institutions, including at Yale, and has now spread to almost 13 other institutions. So in fact, at Yale, the first course was offered by the physicist Simon Mokri. And since we started our course, we found out that through convergent evolution, Brown University actually also has a course. It's very similar that in fact started out as a student designed course. And so So far, all of our courses have been offered with undergraduates, but if any of you in the PoLS network want to try something out with graduate students and postdocs, we'd be happy to work with you. I wanted to point out that we did have an NSF funded conference planned for our first 5 HSTEM course adoptees to happen in June, and that sadly has gotten postponed to this coming June. It looks like we may still need to be virtual, so there may be an opportunity for any of you who are interested to also join in that conference. So I want to introduce the origin and evolution of the HSTEM course model, which has really proven a flexible and persistent means of keeping the conversation about equity and inclusion in STEM a priority on our campus. And importantly, it has provided a structure that keeps student voice at the forefront of the conversation, and it empowers them to be the primary architects of improvements and modifications. But it grounds their efforts in a national context while also providing a structure to partner strategically with campus stakeholders, which enhances the possibility of their interventions being effective and sustainable. So the course actually continues to be the core of what being human in STEM is, but through the many activities, participants, events, and resulting resources, that has helped to establish a broader ethos in our STEM community at Amherst. And really, being human in STEM now kind of serves as a nucleus or hub of campus-wide STEM inclusion activities. So I want to first acknowledge that we're in the midst of this nationwide reckoning with police brutality and the fatal consequences of racism. And this is just the tiniest snapshot that doesn't do justice to the unrelenting reality of what Black Americans have lived and unceasingly called attention to for the last 400+ years. But for the first time in my lifetime, we're seeing a really widespread recognition and willingness in science to address racism and see how this actually is incorporated into our institutions in STEM. And we're seeing this recognition at every level, including, I put here the Biophysical Society statement, and it's really seems to be we're at a point where we're shattering the myth that science is colorblind and must be apolitical. But at the same time, while public recognition and statements of solidarity and good intent are heartening, they're not enough. And as this cartoon from Victor Bernardo in the New Yorker shows, we have to do something about it. And unlike what's sort of implied here, it's not the job of folks holding non-majority identities to tell us what to do. We all need to commit, despite the many doubts and questions shown here, worries about doing it right, getting in trouble, being exhausted, living in a pandemic. We need to commit and not just find a checklist of internet-sourced anti-racist actions you can take, but we really have to commit to a daily, lifelong practice of working for social justice. Or as Black feminist Loretta Ross says, working for a human rights movement. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of our Being Human in STEM course model and argue that I think, and we at Amherst think that our course model, which has been refined through collaboration with close to 100 students, faculty, and staff partners over the past 5 years, really offers the opportunity for STEM folks at any level of comfort, knowledge, or experience with issues of equity and inclusion to kickstart such a lifelong practice of being human in STEM. So the course provides a foundation in academic literature while equally valuing and integrating lived experiences of your own and those of your peers and students. And it equips participants with tools and practice with things like discussing difficult issues, building community across difference, working effectively with a team, and identifying disconnects to address, and experimenting with realistic steps towards change. So I want to take us back to how being human in STEM got started. It was a nearly identical moment in the timeline of the fatal consequences of racism in the US. But 5 years ago, this did not trigger the unprecedented global response, particularly not in STEM. And this is the moment of the birth of HSTEM. And like so many movements that lay the groundwork and are ready and waiting for those of us with the privilege of awakening more slowly, HSTEM was catalyzed by young Black women. At this point, I would love to turn it over to the voice of Sanyu, the student who really reacted to this moment 5 years ago to help catalyze the Amherst Uprising protest, which set off a chain reaction of change at Amherst, including the founding of HSTEM. Because there's not enough time, I'll paraphrase what she shared in a previous presentation with me. So she and two of her friends were really seeing the campus unrest that was happening at Mizzou, at Yale University, and seeing in Sanyu and Lorado's home country the largest post-apartheid protests that had ever happened around massive tuition hikes happening at South African universities. And so they decided they wanted to really do something to show solidarity that wasn't just posting on social media. And so over the course of a couple hours, they organized a sit-in, they emailed the president and the dean and faculty and staff and set up a 1-hour sit-in to take place in Frost Library. And that sit-in started at 1 p.m. and exploded into a 4-day sit-in occupation of the library where students really shared painful testimonials of their experiences of holding marginalized identities as students at Amherst College. And the entire campus was really transfixed by the stories of these students. And it was a moment of reckoning for our campus that I have never seen at any other institution that I've been at. However, there weren't a lot of STEM professors who made it to the library during the sit-in. And Sanyu talks about being hyper aware of the fact that her identity, being Black and being a woman, wasn't represented in science, and that it was troubling that during the sit-in there weren't many science professors there. So 5 years ago at Amherst, I was teaching biochemistry. I was listening to the stories, discussing them and these questions that were floating around at the sit-in and in class with many STEM students. And what happened next was organic, but with hindsight, fit into this process that has since become the MO for how we do just about everything in being human in STEM. So I'm going to talk about these 4 steps of moving from listening to partnering to make change. One of my biochemistry students, Louise, who like Sanyu was wondering why more STEM professors weren't there, wrote an email to all STEM faculty and staff requesting support for the sit-in. And this quote highlights how she hit a note that resonated with all STEM faculty, really this respect and love for the STEM field as well as the Amherst community. And her incredibly brave and vulnerable email, together with that of a gender non-binary biochemistry major, really did move STEM departments to listen. This prompted public letters of support from every STEM department, expressing dismay that students were experiencing such pain and marginalization in our midst, and pledging to do a better job and really talking about being ready for dialogue with students about this. I was incredibly moved by the student stories, but even more so inspired by the brave young women who had started the sit-in, who just decided to do something and then set in motion the most transformative moment that Amherst had ever seen. And I had been sharing the story of my own STEM journey over and over during this time. And on the one hand, moving from Saturday science, where in fact this is a physics professor at a local university, through majoring in biochemistry, getting my PhD in biochemistry, doing a postdoc at Yale, doing a research fellowship at Stanford, and now being on the tenure track at Amherst, it could seem like a very obvious linear conventional trajectory of success in STEM. I got a publication from undergrad research. I had 2 predoctoral fellowships. I published in high-profile journals as a graduate student, and I've established a very solid research career with undergraduates at Amherst. But aside from some goofy fashion and hairstyles, there's nothing really human about this story. I worked hard and I did good. However, I'm also the queer biracial daughter of an immigrant from India who grew up in the flyover state of Nebraska, and in a multicultural adoptive family where I was always trying to project colorblindness and normalcy to prove to everyone that we were just a regular old American family before they could ask me why my dad has an accent, whether my 2 brothers from Korea were actually biologically related. And during grad school, I had to illegally marry my wife, who I've now been married to for over 20 years. And during my postdoc and research fellowship, adopted children who are often mistaken for Black. And so as a human with many intersecting identities, I really identified with student experiences of marginalization. And so since one of my primary identities is as a protein chemist for whom the reaction pathway with an activation barrier and tuning that barrier can describe everything in life, I went to my dry erase board and thought about how I have succeeded in STEM as a human who is often the only something in the room because of a number of factors, including being born into a zip code with good schools, good health care, being upper middle class, having 2 not just college educated parents, but actual college professor parents who are to this day informal academic career coaches who helped to lower my barrier. My beloved babysitter was a woman of color physicist. I made the choice to go to a women's college where I had 4 years to skip any possible contamination of my STEM education with unconscious gender bias. I started in protein folding where there were women role models and mentors who have supported me to this day. So I have a lot of factors that have helped to lead to my success by external measures in STEM. As I was reflecting on this with the students, we were sharing ideas, thinking about the structural barriers, and reflecting on the idea that you need to check your identity at the door as a serious scientist. And we wanted to harness the momentum of the STEM department commitments and think about what could we do to bridge these many disconnects that exist in STEM, particularly the one between what STEM faculty intend and the student experience. So we closed the loop of this process by partnering. So these are the 9 students and I who took a liberal arts approach to design our own special topics course, which we called Being Human in STEM, which combines academic inquiry and community engagement to learn and act together to bridge some of the disconnects in our Amherst STEM community. So that first pilot experiment, the students really wanted to center the lived experience. And so they did over 40 interviews with Amherst students. They wanted to place these stories into the context of the literature. So they read and annotated more than 40 articles. They investigated the efforts that Amherst had already been making in the arena of supporting students in STEM particularly. And it turns out there had been a lot of things which we had forgotten or not been aware of. And then they conducted interviews with peer institutions to find out what kind of STEM supports they were offering. And so they collected all of these onto a website, which is ongoing today. And our class culminated in a community open house or salon, which was attended by over 75 faculty, staff, and students. And it is safe to say that everyone was blown away by what these students had done. And so this was the birth of Being Human in STEM. And so we've now gone through 8 iterations. We're going to be launching our first January all remote course. And it's taken place largely through the efforts, the collaborative efforts with my colleague from the Center for Community Engagement, Megan Lister. And then we've had a rotating host of co-facilitators, which is part of the secret to how this can be a really community transformative course. And then we've had a range of amazing students who have progressed through. And our course model really still is grounded on building community, researching, and equally valuing lived experience in academic literature, then using that foundation to lead the inclusion conversation and design interventions to help change our own campus, but then also to connect globally. So I'll just give you a flavor. This was our spring course, which, as you know, was interrupted by COVID. So we went from being in person to virtual. So we started out with building community. We did foundational research. We investigated and shared our own stories of being human in STEM. And then the students focused on designing proposals to help change campus. And so this just shows how we came up with our own community norms, and we put together this beautiful flyer by side that integrated what we had come up with together, and we posted that in our classroom. We read all this academic literature and really tried to synthesize the themes, and you can see that we did an activity that really had our students pairing up and thinking about what are the overarching themes that come out of this. A key part is the HSTEM story assignment. I told you some of my story, and students are free to create their story and share it as they wish. And we turn those stories into bookmarks that we can share. So this is a little bit of how we design interventions by sharing the stories of all the diverse humans who are in our HSTEM class. And then we connect globally. We had a number of speakers and folks who are really active in inclusion in general, and the students got to practice talking with them and putting what they were learning into context. One of the biggest successful projects has been over the course of those first 3 semesters, students put together a handbook which included practices that they recommended and that Amherst staff and faculty put into play. So that's available to download, and that has been given to every STEM faculty member who started at Amherst since we put out that handbook. Students who did a workshop series for their proposal this spring actually shared that with the biology department when the shutdown STEM was happening, and they actually influenced the biology department to put up their own equity inclusion page. And that, I think, really shows how students taking this class can influence and shape their culture. So I'm running out of time, so I will just suggest that I'll invite you to think of different ways to respond than we typically do in STEM. And you can start by following the hashtag Black in Physics, which is happening this week. And I want to end by acknowledging the folks who have helped make this possible and who have funded it. And thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to a fun discussion in person.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jaswal, for sharing with us those incredible efforts and empowering stories of the work that you've done through HSTEM. And now open it up for questions.
While we're waiting, I'll just say that my sound totally died on my laptop today, so that's why I'm on my iPad here. So persistence through failure and stuff that happens, you know, it's all part of being a scientist, I guess.
So I guess I'll start us off. It seems like there's been all of these, positive accomplishments and bounds, both at Amherst and, nationally coming out of this. But have you faced and how have you handled any pushback to the idea that the things happening outside of the STEM classroom should matter, impact, or affect the things happening inside the STEM classrooms?
Yeah, so I think at Amherst, at least, what really made that difference and why we responded differently than I had to fly through it, but the way that I think we in STEM are used to responding to such things is that we don't even get to that first listening step because it's not science, we're too busy. But was because Louise and the other student reached out with emails to say why this was important to them as students who are in STEM, who love STEM, and who want to thrive in STEM. And so at Amherst, we're all about the students, and every single one of my colleagues, regardless of how aware or how much they think what's going on outside should influence us, they all want to support our students. And so that, I think, was what really broke through for our departments to make those statements. And then once you make the statement, then part of what HSTEM was about was continuing to kind of keep that. That's why we really wanted to keep the conversation going, and we really wanted to provide ways for departments to be kept accountable for being willing to dialogue with the students and try to make change. And I think certainly, as a person who was not legally married when my children came into my life, and they actually got to attend my legal wedding, and now maybe the legality of our marriage is going to be challenged again. I think, there's just no way that we can pretend in STEM that what's going on outside doesn't affect us and how we do our science and how we teach our students. And I think that's why we're calling it being human in STEM, because we're all human. That's what we can agree on. And it's not fair to those of us who don't fit a certain model to expect that when we bring what's happening to us in our lives into our STEM communities, which we love and want to belong to too, that that's somehow not appropriate.
Yes, thank you. Excellent. So I'm looking through the chat. Do we have any further questions for Dr. Joswal?
I might ask you all to think about if your institutions or departments put out a statement for shutdown STEM, #shutdown STEM. And I think that gives us, in this moment, that gives us who are wanting to talk about these things and need to talk about these things, and these are our lives as humans in STEM, that gives us some credibility for starting conversations. If Cell Magazine can say science has a racism problem, then surely we in Amherst Chemistry can say we are part of a racist problem. And I think once we start to agree that racism is in our society, it's not a personal thing that I am a racist, it's that I've been raised in a racist society, and so have all of us who have been raised in the US. I think then let go, just acknowledge it and move on. If you had a pressing scientific problem that you really wanted to solve, you wouldn't say, oh, well, I don't know anything about that, or I might make a mistake, or no, you would say, let's get this figured out. We've been trying for decades to get more women in physics, to get more people of color at every stage of the pipeline. But let's think about, it's not a pipeline. I recommend looking into Professor Baranda Montgomery. She uses great plant biology metaphors for the fact that you always blame individuals for not thriving, but you don't look at the landscape and the nutrients that you're giving. So, okay, I see there are some more questions now. So,
yes. So Charlene Dinos asks, are some of the stories students have created available publicly? I think this would be a wonderful to make available to high school and middle school students.
Yes, so our website, so this is the thing, it's been me and students and every now and then some post-bac fellows, but we haven't had a real infrastructure to help with supporting this. So you have to dig a little bit, but you can find a lot on our website. And so I think a lot of that bookmarks are available, so you could print them out. They're really fun. They actually on one side have the have like a coloring thing you could use, and on the other side it's the story of a person in STEM. And we'd really love to share the templates with you so you could all do that for your own programs. Yeah, so, and contact me if you'd like more, if you'd like to find out more. Yes, okay. So,
So Landry Horimberry asks, what is the best strategy for building community when you have a small number of differing minority students in your department?
Yeah, so building community is a really tough thing. And that's the nice thing about the way that we've structured the course, is that we are very intentional about building community in the beginning. And I saw that someone posted about culturally responsive strategies, and we read things about how to talk across difference, and we really put a lot into building community so that our students who come from a bunch of different backgrounds end up feeling very able to show up with their whole human self. I think, yeah, I think really listening, and I think those of us who have a lot of privilege in certain ways should spend more time listening than we do putting our own stories out there. And I think that the best thing to do is to listen and to validate, and you know, we're very reflexive as scientists to jump in and say, well, but I haven't seen that, or well, I've known so and so who did fine. And that's all fine, and those are data and those are our experiences. However, when you're trying to build community and welcome people into a space that was never meant for them, and that was in certain ways specifically built to exclude them, then you need to realize that you got to do a lot more listening to make that space welcoming.
Lauren asks, can you comment on any curricular changes that have resulted in other classes, e.g. introductory physics classes?
Yeah, so the handbook that we put together, because it's now being shared with every STEM faculty who starts, a lot of faculty have adopted things like the 1 minute sheet, which is a way to get immediate feedback during a lecture, and you know, what's the main point? I think Eric Mazur could talk to this, or Dr. McGuire. But you can say something you're confused about, and it's also a space to put down anything you'd like the professor to know about. And so we're doing this across most of our chemistry classes, and I think many of the biology classes as well. And students report that this gives them the opportunity to ask questions when they're not feeling confident to do it in the class, as well as they can say, I'm really struggling, and then we can reach out to them. That's one example. And then a lot of the professors are doing this kind of sharing their story of being a human in STEM, and especially emphasizing ways that it wasn't just a linear path. They didn't get all A's in all of their STEM classes. And that has also been really kind of opened the door to students seeing us as human. Yes, I see that Dr. McGuire put in the reference for the 1 minute paper. Yeah. I think the other thing that, oh.
No, please
sorry.
go ahead.
The other thing that I think points to real impact is that these students were able to, they were ready after having taken the course to reach out to the biology department and suggest specific actions that could be taken. And the biology department was willing to listen and partner with these students, because these are students who were very, who are part of their department, and did it in a very reasoned way that included not just do this because I say so, but like, we've read the research and we suggest these things, like having more diverse people in our seminar series, things like that. Sorry, I had.
And Then Jennifer asked, can you please share the name of the person who uses plant metaphors to explain pipeline versus landscape and environment?
Yes, Baranda Montgomery, and she has, for the hashtag Black and Micro, or Black and Microbiology event, there's an amazing YouTube that she seminar that she did that also addresses these issues really beautifully. And for any of you who aren't on Twitter and feel like, oh, it's too overwhelming or something, I would just invite you to think about, again, what you would do if you really needed to learn how to use some kind of fancy microscopy to do your experiments. Like, you would put that effort in, even though it's kind of a hassle and you don't know it, because this is where you're going to be able to listen to, especially if there's very few minority folks in your departments. Hashtag Black in Physics is happening this week, and you can go on the web and you can look at some of it. And I would say, please just listen. Don't try to get in there and offer your responses to things. Just listen, please.
Once again, let's thank Dr. Jaswal for sharing these really inspiring stories that have come out of this program. And with that, I'm going to be turning it over to Dr. Margaret Chong.
Thank you so much, Keeling. I'd like to thank all the participants for your engaging discussion and thoughtful contributions. And I'd like to thank all the speakers, moderators, and hosts for the roundtable. You guys are fantastic. I just see that there is hope in the future. You guys will do much better than us. And tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern time, there'll be second day. In the morning, we'll have more talks and discussions, and in the afternoon we'll have more reflective moments, and then trying to come up with what's the best practices and actionable items, and ended with a town hall meeting that'll be hosted by Professor Jose Onuchik and myself. There'll be an hour town hall, and I will share some of the thoughts from the roundtable discussions and any open discussions that can happen, and we would love to listen. As what Sheila said, listen is a very important activity for us to do now. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you, Callie. Thank you, Margie. Thank you, Charlene.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you.
Is tomorrow still